Pleasure to be here. My name is Shelley, Mayor, Chair of the Senate Education Committee, and I am the senator from the 37th Senate District, which runs from the Bronx border in Yonkers to the Connecticut border in Westchester. I'm here with so many of my colleagues, and I'm going to give them all a chance to say some opening remarks. I just would like to point out Senator John Liu is here. He's chair of the Committee on New York City Schools, which our leader, Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins, established as an additional committee in the Senate this year, and very importantly so. And we also have some of our regents here, and I want to acknowledge them as well. Let me just make some brief remarks and then give it to my colleagues. Today is today is Wednesday, October 18th. Together with my colleague, Senator Brian Benjamin, who I hope is going to be becoming chair of the Senate Committee on Budget and Revenues, today we are hosting another in our series of roundtables that we are holding across the state to examine the component elements of the state's foundation aid formula for the funding of public schools. This is a statewide effort. We've held roundtables in the Hudson Valley, Buffalo, Syracuse, this one next week in Queens, and a public hearing in New York City on December 3rd. Our goal is to hear regional stakeholder input regarding the components of the foundation aid formula in relation to student, district, and community needs, with the goal of greater equity in school financing across the board. We are joined by a number of our Senate colleagues. I think some of our Assembly colleagues will be coming, as well as several of our regents, as well as staff of the New York State Comptroller's Office, which we want to acknowledge and thank them for their participation. I want to thank my committee director, Georgia Asciutto, for her tremendous work, along with the central staff of the Senate, in putting these roundtables together. By way of background, in 2007-2008, the New York State Legislature adopted the foundation aid formula, which is codified in the New York State Education Law, Section 3602. It was passed as a response to the decision of the Court of Appeals in CFE versus New York, which affirmed the right to a, quote, sound basic education under the New York State Constitution, and established that the previous distribution of state aid constitutes a violation of this right. The provisions of the formula, which we are discussing today, attempted to determine the needs of each particular school district with a complex set of factors weighed together to determine the amount of foundation aid per pupil owed to each school district in the state. The original plan was for a 4-year phase-in of the formula, which was cut short by the Great Recession. Currently, $3.4 billion remains to be phased in for 398 school districts under the law. Today, we are focusing specifically on the factors used in the formula, with the goal to solicit up-to-date factors that more accurately reflect the changes in our state over the past 12 years and changes in particular districts with unique needs. To that end, we will be discussing specific elements of the formula, not a generalized discussion of the issue of the state's funding of public schools. That being said, we in the Senate majority have been totally committed to a full phase-in of foundation aid. That is our #1 priority. Last year, we were not entirely successful, but we continued the fight, and we will continue the fight this year. We know the #1 issue is getting the money that is owed to public schools out the door to these schools. And that is a given here. We don't need to restate the obvious. I only say because we are trying to be constructive and productive in addressing the issues that we can address legislatively. The format has been as follows, and I hope to continue it today. Ask our fellow senators to give brief opening statements. Then we're going to ask, and this has been completely disregarded, I'm not a very good teacher, everyone to give basically an introduction of themselves and a very brief, not more than 2-minute introduction of their particular perspective on foundation aid with respect to either their district or the group that they're here representing. After everyone has done so, we'll be posing specific questions for discussion with a goal to hear from a variety of views about how to improve the law to appropriately measure student need and move to a more equitable formula. We are deeply interested in your views, hello Senator Gorin, about factors of student need in your own district that may not be accurately represented, the impact of regional costs, and the impact of cuts in your district over the past several years. We appreciate that there are listeners here today, and we ask that the participants' comments be directed at the issues I've raised. Obviously, there are many stakeholders here who represent different perspectives in the educational field, and we are very pleased to have them. Those that do not have a chance to speak today are more than welcome to submit their comments to us. I will give you the email address, or to appear at the public hearing in Manhattan on December 3rd, or alternatively to submit testimony at that time. I do want to particularly acknowledge and thank our two regents who are here, Roger Tillis, representing this region, the 10th Judicial District, and Nan Mead, the 1st Judicial District. And the regents have been very much part of this listening process, and I'm very, very appreciative that they've taken the time to participate today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my home senator here, Senator John Brooks.
Thank you. And let me first welcome everybody here. The building looks kind of new, right? I was in the first graduating class from this building more than 50 years ago. So it's great to be here. I also had the honor of serving on the school board here for a number of years. And Seaford is like many school districts. We're in a situation where we have a very, very limited commercial tax base. And the way the state aid formulas work, we don't get significant aid, and much of the burden of funding education rests on the residential homeowners. I think what we're going to be doing today is critically important. I think we all recognize we have challenges in funding education and equitably funding education. We recognize in this past year, with the implementation of the new federal tax act, New York State sent another $15 billion to Washington. That's going to make life even more difficult than it's been. So I look forward to having a good, open discussion. Many of you in the room over the years, we've been involved in different discussions on funding education. I do think this is important. I'm glad everybody's here, and I think for our community here, it's an opportunity to press the concerns that we have in the methodology of funding now. So I look forward to a good, solid, open discussion today. Jim?
Thank you, John, and I would really like to thank Senator Mayer for coming here to Long Island and for your leadership. And I'm really here to listen to you and your thoughts and your ideas. And as we move forward and discuss the needs of trying to get more funding for our school districts on Long Island, we also have to recognize that we have particular challenges on Long Island in terms of the high cost of living. We have challenges now that the property tax cap is permanent, and so we really need to do all we can to make sure that our schools are fully funded. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Gorman. Thank you again, Senator Mayer, for hosting us here and coming to hear from a lot of our Long Island schools. My name is Anna Kaplan. I'm New York State Senator for District 7. I have 3 superintendents from my districts here today. Dr. Solano from Herrick's, Superintendent of Herrick School. Dr. Budai, Superintendent of Westbury School, and also Dr. Hines, Superintendent of Port Washington. We're here really just to hear from you. I've had meetings with all of you, and I know that how we decide this is really important. It's important for our public schools, and it's very important for our taxpayers, and we want to do everything possible to give you the tools that you need to make sure that you're giving the best education to our children. Thank you.
Good. I'm like just on the other side of the border in eastern Queens. I don't get to pay the high property taxes that unfortunately you do. But I get the added bonuses of having a city income tax that you don't have. So at the end of the day, it all evens out. But I'm really delighted to be part of this roundtable. I want to thank my colleagues in Long Island. They have been steadfast in their mission to hold the line on taxes and yet try to find the foundation aid increases that we're desperately fighting for. And I'm here because even though our chairperson mentioned my involvement with New York City schools, I am also proud to be a member of the Education Committee of the State Senate. So where Shelley Mayer goes is where I go. Great to see everybody and look forward to a fruitful discussion.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm State Senator Todd Kaminsky, proud to be joined by Dr. Bill Johnson from Rockville Center and Dr. Cami from Baldwin. We have a particularly difficult task in Albany, letting the rest of the state understand what's happening here and what our needs are. There's a general assumption that we are a land of wealthy people with white picket fences who do whatever we want, get whatever we want with respect to resources, and that if anything, we need to be figuring out how to do more with less. And I think my discussions with you and our discussions with all of us and our realities, having children in the district or gone through the districts, know that nothing could be farther from the truth. We have tremendous challenges meeting our needs, and that there are ever-growing problems in this environment we find ourselves in. So I'm very excited today to listen, find out what's going on the ground, and then together, as a group of Long Island senators with the support of Chairwoman, Mayor, and other good senators like John Liu, we have to go up to Albany and fight that fight on all of our behalves, and I look forward to doing that, so thank you.
Thank you. So I don't think Senator Thomas is on his way, and Senator Benjamin, I hope, is on their way, so we would just jump over them, and we will start. I can't see your name, sir. I apologize. Michael Hines. So if you could do a brief introduction and a very brief summary of sort of your perspective or your concerns about foundation, we'll start, and then we will move to questions.
Thank you. Senator Mayor, Senator Kaplan, and all the senators and the men and women who are here on behalf of not only the Port Washington School District, but for Long Island, along with my Board of Education members, Larry Greenstein and Emily Bays. My name is Michael Hines, the proud superintendent of the Port Washington School District, and would like to thank you very much for organizing and opening up this much-needed conversation about something, as I know, that is extremely complex. In many ways, things that we hold near and dear in the state of New York, such as our education system, is really stuck in time. From the way schools were designed based on a standardized industrial revolution model to producing students, to the way our classrooms should look, or even how we evaluate teachers and principals. The problem is we're stuck in homeostasis. Just the same way that we fund schools, it is an antiquated model for sure. So some quick facts about Port Washington. It's a school district that is transitioning toward a very exciting future for our students and for our community. Our families highly value education in ensuring that all students are not only well-rounded in academics, but certainly in the arts and athletics, which is really the essence of the whole child. And as excited as we are for our school district and community, we do have many families who are struggling to continue every single day with lots of complex struggles as well. So the fact is our school district has seen an enrollment increase of 24% since 2002, and we are continuing this growth as we speak here this morning. We all know that statewide enrollment has declined over the past two decades and continues to do so, but to date our district enrollment has grown to well over 5,500 students, and we continue to receive more students each day. We are a very diverse school district, both economically and culturally. Our beautiful students speak over 41 languages within the Port Washington community, which is a major point of pride for us. We also have an ENL population that represents over 8% of our student body, and we have many students who have a limited and interrupted formal education, as I know for a fact many of us here do as well. 19% of our student body receives free and reduced lunch, and an incredible special education population that we serve makes up about 15% of our student body that we lovingly serve. But the challenge we know comes to ensuring that all students get what they need and deserve every single day. Bless you. And we need to make sure that every student is afforded opportunities toward discovering their talents and maximizing their potential. So the problem becomes for our school district is that we receive less than 6% in state aid, 5.4 to be exact. And I want to repeat, less than 6%, but that equates to half as far as our foundation aid. Half of that is our foundation aid. And as a district, we are still owed $4 million. And that's a travesty. In Port Washington, we are doing more with less, like I know everybody at this table is for sure. But the reality is every Board of Education member who is here or may not be here at this point represents its constituency. And they can't keep going to the taxpayers and burdening them with taxes as far as increases are concerned. And that's our scenario. We believe the indices data is antiquated and should be updated to reflect more current standards. I know we'll have many times today to talk about some of these things as we feel can take place for sure. And I think any of us here would say we don't want to steal from anybody's piece of the pie. We just want to make sure the pie is much larger and fully funded so we can move forward. And in closing, I want to start with, we all know who Einstein is, and we know how he defines certain things, but he defines a genius as taking something complex and making it simple. And I'm hoping the goal today, because you are a genius, Senator Mayor, that you allow this to come to fruition today. So thank you.
Unlike undeserved compliment, but thank you. And you didn't stay to your 2 minutes.
I'm going to help with that. I'm going to be very brief. Good morning. My name is Emily Bays, and I am a Board of Education trustee for the Port Washington School District and the chair of the Legislative Task Force. I'm actually going to defer most of my time to my fellow trustee and member of the task force, Larry Greenstein. But before I do, I would like to state that Port Washington is very grateful for the invitation to speak about the Foundation Aid formula. In 2017, our legislative task force compiled lots of data with regard to our state aid, and one of the areas we concentrated on was in fact the Foundation Aid formula. We presented our findings to our community and our state legislators at the time. We look forward to discussing it more with you here today.
Thank you, Senator Mayor, for taking the bridge and for holding these roundtables. You bringing forward this issue is the first step to finding a solution. I'm grateful that the committee has taken on this complex and important issue. My name is Larry Greenstein, and I've served on the Port Washington Board of Education for almost 15 years, and I'm proud to represent my colleagues in my district here today. We board members have a fiduciary obligation to our taxpayers. We have also pledged to uphold the state constitution, which requires that we provide a sound basic education to all children residing in our district. The current foundation formula makes it increasingly difficult to balance these two obligations, and we receive only about 50% of our computed foundation aid. As Dr. Hines mentioned, we are an economically and culturally diverse district, and we are proud of that. However, it does bring its own financial challenges. For example, Port Washington has a few outliers at the high end of the income scale that distorts the district's expected minimum local contribution. Using median income rather than mean income would more accurately represent our community's ability to pay. In addition, the poverty levels are based by statute on the 2000 census, now 20 years old and not reflective of our changing demographics. That, coupled with out-of-date and too broad-brush regional cost differentials, cause over 90% of our funding to come from local property taxes. And property taxes are highly regressive. We have to ask those families who can least afford it to share a disproportionately large share of our funding. Exacerbating that situation is the tax cap formula, which fails to take our growing enrollment into account. We do a great job educating all of our students, and our statistics bear that out. However, with a growing student enrollment, a tax cap that does not take that growth into account, and our state aid level of under 6%, we have had to make hard fiscal choices. We've always prioritized the kids and put whatever funds we have into their direct education. That has come at the expense of our physical plant. Over the years, our buildings have deteriorated, which has caused us to issue bonds to improve our facilities, especially our roofs, which adds a further burden to our local taxpayers. As you look to restructure state aid, we would ask that you consider that for districts with growing enrollment like ours, that the tax cap adds an extra burden to, since it does not account for that growth. We're hopeful you will be able to arrive at a fair and equitable system which will benefit all of the students in New York State. We will be glad to help you in any way we can. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Senator Thomas has joined us, so you could say some hello.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Sorry for being late. I'm State Senator Kevin Thomas with District 6, a little north of here. I'm so happy that Senator Mayer is championing this cause for us. We haven't really had this kind of discussion in decades on how to kind of change the way we fund our K-12. And I want to thank Senator Mayer for leading this discussion, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lucille Vitale, and I am a Vice President for New York State PTA. I have been an active leader for the last 20-plus years in the PTA, first starting in my home community of Massapequa and continuing for the last 6 years, where I have been on the Board of Directors for New York State PTA, focusing in the area of advocacy. Advocating for all children with one voice is first and foremost the main goal of PTA. We are the largest child advocacy organization in the state and the country, and in New York alone, we are nearly 250,000 members strong. I would first like to start by thanking our legislator, all of our legislation, for your continued support of public education, and especially to Senator Mayer for attending our annual PTA convention last week in Tarrytown. It was wonderful to have you there. Thank you. Currently in the state of New York, we are behind about $4 billion of what was due to our schools under the foundation aid formula that was enacted in 2007. Since that time, the total number of New York students receiving free and reduced priced lunch has increased by 15%. Our English language learners have increased by 18%, and students with disabilities have increased by 14%. The needs of children are changing, but the budget is not accommodating these changes. The current system has not adequately addressed the question of what it really costs to meet student performance expectations. New York State PTA is advocating for an update to the foundation aid formula based on the current conditions. We are also looking for an update to the costing out study to determine the appropriate foundation aid amount per pupil. Additionally, we are looking for an update to student need factors and also an updated and restructure of the regional cost index. What was promised to our children has not been received. Funding has been inadequate, with some communities having to make very difficult choices on what they can and cannot offer their students, which is unacceptable. In this wonderful state, our children should be given every opportunity to succeed, not be stifled by inadequate funding.
My name is Dana Playton. I am also a Vice President for New York State PTA, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this roundtable discussion this morning. The wonderful collaboration between the legislature and New York State PTA is truly appreciated and so very valuable. We are grateful to continually be a part of this conversation. I have 3 children. My older 2 were 9 and 7 years old when my youngest son was born. We have lived in the same house in Suffolk County for over 30 years, and all 3 of them attended the same schools. That said, however, each of them had a completely different educational experience with different educational opportunities. The impact of devastating budget cuts and shortfalls from year to year meant that the school district had less to offer to my second child and even less to my third. Because the foundation aid formula wasn't implemented, my district had to make hard decisions. Programs that my oldest son had the chance to participate in, both in and out of the classroom, were not offered to my daughter only 2 years later. The variety of school day electives and extracurricular sports and activities saw tremendous cuts, fewer choices, and fewer spots available. 7 years later, the options were even scarcer for my youngest. Student needs are changing, and the impact of past years of budget shortfalls on student learning is distressing. More and more budget decisions are forced on school boards by factors beyond their control, including literally hundreds of state and federal mandates, the majority of which are unfunded. Curriculum and class sizes are also severely impacted by budget cuts. More importantly, individual and overall student performance could be compromised if curriculum cuts are deep or long-lasting. I'm a paraprofessional in a kindergarten class.
We have seen the elimination of curriculum materials and resources, as well as cuts in supplies. We are making do, but it's at the expense of our students, and it's wrong. Social and emotional learning provides a foundation for safe and positive learning and enhances students' ability to succeed in school, careers, and life. Districts are placing a greater emphasis on SEL and whole child support for students, but the current funding formula doesn't actually address either of these. This is a huge problem. We need to right this wrong, and we need to do it now. The children and youth in New York State deserve more. They deserve fair and equitable funding to ensure meaningful and educational opportunities for lifelong success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Lorraine Geller. I'm Executive Director of the National Suffolk School Boards Association. Our association represents 108 Long Island Boards of Education. I thank you, Senator Mayer, for convening this series of roundtables in order to engage the greater education community in an examination of New York's mechanism for distributing state funding for its schools. I'd also like to express appreciation to those in attendance from Long Island State Senate delegation, Senators Kaminsky, Brooks, Thomas, Kaplan, Warren, and yes, Senator Liu. Geographically, you are still part of Long Island. Their attention to this critical issue reflects an acute understanding that for their constituencies, the ability to provide for high-performing public schools is an enduring priority. It is advantageous that you are winding down your series of roundtables here on Long Island. Much of what you have heard from other regions will likely be cited here today, albeit with a focus on those issues specifically impacting Long Island and its schools. For Long Island, the tension between state and local funding has been a long existing reality. We have experienced the waxing and waning, the highs and lows, the successes and failures of a myriad of funding formulas and band-aids over many decades. It was with both hope and innate skepticism that we viewed the unveiling of the Foundation Aid formula in 2007. The premise of the formula was to bring a more equitable distribution of state funding by directing aid through a formula that would identify, measure, and prioritize a district's wealth and need. But for a significant number of Long Island districts, the well-intentioned Foundation Aid formula was hampered by a flaw whose initial negative impact grew upon itself and was further compounded by economic downturns and additional state aid initiatives in the ensuing years. That flaw, the insufficient recognition of regional cost differences, revealed itself on day one. 1/3 of Long Island districts, most of which would reasonably be classified as mid-wealth, were instead, by virtue of an inaccurate assessment of their wealth and need, relegated to save harmless status. Save harmless usually manifests itself in the waning years of a distribution mechanism that has failed to stay relevant to evolving funding needs. It was routinely used to prevent a district from receiving less state aid than it had in the prior year. The catch, however, was that districts on Save Harmless were ineligible to access annual increases built into the Foundation Aid formula, specifically for items such as enrollment growth. And in 2007-2008, at the onset of the economic recession, Long Island schools were experiencing a spurt in enrollment growth that far outpaced the rest of the state. With state aid inaccessible, local property taxes were tapped to fill the void, thereby creating the momentum towards the implementation of New York's tax levy limit in 2011. So too did Long Island's lowest wealth school districts suffer from the lack of recognition of regional costs and wealth differences. Their ability to provide education comparable to neighboring schools within a high-cost and competitive region has been compromised by an insufficient recognition of their actual wealth and need. As referenced in the biannual costs and outcomes report of the Long Island Education Coalition and Long Island Association, these wealthy school districts receive significantly less state aid than the least wealthy districts in the rest of the state. Pertinent to this discussion is that the tax levy limit, commonly referred to as the tax cap, established a baseline for state funding for these districts based on the foundation aid formula's initially flawed measurement of wealth and need. The consequent reduced level of state aid established in 2007 set an artificial floor for determining their level of state funding well into the future. Your committees have indicated that regional cost indexes are worthy of attention. For Long Island, a regional indexing of both cost and wealth is critical for a more accurate measurement of the cost of delivering education and a community's ability to contribute to those costs. Simply put, it costs more to do business and deliver government services on Long Island. According to the most recent biannual report of the LIEC and Long Island Association, a state dollar on Long Island by far less than another region of the state. Is that me? Sorry. Okay.
I would ask that.
What's
No,
that?
let me just make a point. I appreciate that you have your written statement. It's very excellent and very helpful.
Okay.
We're going to get into the details, so everyone does not have to read their whole statement now. We are going to get into the nitty-gritty. I can assure you.
I'll take a breath.
Okay. Good morning. My name is John Stimmel. I'm the superintendent of Sable Schools on the South Shore of Long Island. I'm incredibly grateful to be able to participate here. My understanding is Sable is one of over 200 districts in New York State that state funding has been preserved under Save Harmless. But I'd like to start out by saying how grateful the educators and the community are in Sable. We know how hard our legislators work to provide adequate funding for us, and we are very cognizant of that. Times have changed since the funding formula came in, and you've heard it mentioned. The tax cap has a significant impact on us and our ability to recoup any loss in our revenue stream. We are also dealing on the curriculum and instruction side with new mandates for next generation learning standards, and the impact of increasing services for social and emotional learning. One of the two key factors that I am constantly looking at are how do we sustain our programs, and what level of predictability can we have in terms of our funding streams. In Sable, we're very proud of our quality of instruction, most recently manifested in our high school being recognized as a blue ribbon school. So as we go forward, we hope that our legislators will be able to keep all the desirable outcomes that the foundation aid formula hopes for, but perhaps look to mitigate any undesirable impacts, such as if the foundation aid formula were to run as is in Sable, we would have to significantly increase our taxes going forward. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you. My name is Elders Budai, proud superintendent of Westbury School District. Thank you, Senator Mayor and Senator Kaplan, and all senators for being here, showcasing your support for the school districts in Long Island and for the state of New York, along with my colleagues. Westbury sits in a very affluent neighborhood. We sit where mansions are and so forth. Our high school is a very beautiful location, yet we serve not one student that lives in that location. We have 5,300 students, of which we have 100% free and reduced lunch. We've met the threshold. We have over 30% of our students are English language learners, and a very high number of students that are differently abled students as well. And one of my concerns is sustainability. We seem to be doing great things for our students. We are very creative, graduating students of color with higher than average than the state, graduating students that are English language learners as well above the state average, being featured by New York State for best practices, and going on the road with all the great things we're doing. However, I think that moving forward in the next couple of years, we are going to see some very complex issues, and creativity is going to hit its mark. And the social emotional needs of our students are such that this may be the place of safe haven. This may be the place where they see their nutritional value. And I am afraid that once those things start giving up, that we're gonna be at a loss. And our staff is extremely competent, people that really care. Our leadership is really significantly up there when it comes to creativity, but I am afraid of these things. The promise to our children is at stake here, and the promise to our families is at stake here. We are one of the harm suburban 5. If you remember last year, I want to thank you for giving us that opportunity as well, where we currently see 50% of our foundation aid. We have 15 more of students increase enrollment in our school district. Every single day, I see at least 10 to 20 students coming to our high schools, enrolling, and we have an obligation to them to give them a quality education. And our class sizes are absolutely amazing. And so I thank you for really sharing some of your expertise with us when it comes to foundation aid. And we really would like to help you also come up with ideas so that we can address some of these issues along with my colleagues as well.
Good morning, Senator Mayor and Senator Warren, and all the senators that are here today. And Regent Tillis, you are coming back to read to our children. But today I represent not only the superintendents in New York State, but specifically the superintendents in Nassau County, those for small city schools, because I think I'm the only small city sitting at the table today. Is Long Beach here? And more importantly, I'm representing the children in which we serve. We are a unique district, Glen Cove City Schools, as we have seen an increase in enrollment over the last 10 years, as other districts on Long Island and across the state may have seen a decrease in enrollment. Many of our students have come to Glen Cove as SIPE students. And so let me tell you that this year, at the start of the school year, after September 1, we had 57 new SIPE students entering our school district as freshmen. And they are supposed to graduate in 4 years. But I will tell you, the good news is that Glen Cove has moved its graduation rate every year for the last 7 years in the programs that we have put in place and the support that we have given. We have done more with less, more creative, and we continue to strive to serve our district well. But the increase in enrollment is really just a tip of the iceberg. The increases the profile of student needs, both economically, socially, emotionally, and more importantly, educationally. So we continue to do what we have to do. We know that we all in this room recognize the foundation aid formula as flawed. The data in which this formula uses to calculate the aid does not appropriately calculate the needs of our children. And I thank you for taking the time today and using that additional time across the state to help bring us to a reasonable place.
Good morning. I'm Adele Before. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Seaford, so welcome everyone. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to host. I'd like to say, I used to be a social studies teacher, a history teacher, so I always go back to the basics. And the foundation formula in and of itself was originally created at Teachers College in 1923. So conceptually, it was meant to be an equity-based formula. It was not intended to fund a school district like Seaford at a 10% rate. So when we go back to the basics, one of the issues is all the multivariables that are now in the formula, it takes away from the original intent of an equity-based formula. So I think, as Matthew Hines was saying, maybe we do need to go back to the basics and really take a look at what is a foundation formula supposed to do and how do we achieve those goals. Because since we're not fully funded, we've lost about $30 million over the aggregate. So everybody at the table, they're either the highs or the lows, but there shouldn't be that within a state. I shouldn't have to get more funding to take money away from my friend John over here. So figuring that out, because we've sat in an aggregate for a dozen years with this, and even more. I mean, when you go back to the state formula for New York, it's always been convoluted. So how we address this, we may need to strip it down and build it up again.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fino Solano, and I'm the superintendent of the Herrick School District. Thank you, Senator Mayer. Thank you to all of our other senators. Shout out to Senator Kaplan, who represents my district, and also to Senator Liu, being someone that grew up in Queens. I'm from your neighborhood. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the Herrick School District and echo some of the sentiments that were just expressed very clearly. The foundation aid formula does not work. It is confusing, it's convoluted, and it certainly lacks equity. Herrick is a diverse and high-achieving school district of about 4,000 students. We are located in northwestern Nassau County. We take a great deal of pride in doing more with less. Our total state aid this year, 2019-20 school year, represents less than 10% of our total school budget. And the burden of that budget falls squarely on our single-family residents, which make up over 90% of our tax base. We have very little commercial property in Herrick, and so over 90% of the tax base is single-family homeowners who work very hard. Many of them are immigrants. We have over 40 languages spoken in the district. The system appears to be broken, and people are really stretching the limits in terms of their income and their ability to pay school tax and other local taxes. Two things that I'd like to say about the foundation aid system is that as it stands now, Herrick School District is underfunded by approximately $5 million this year. When I try to make sense out of that, I've asked people why this is true. I really have not gotten a sensible and logical answer. There are some school districts that are getting their full foundation aid. Some are getting more than their full foundation aid. And yet, in my district, the aggregate total of what we have lost in foundation aid based on the original 2007 formula is over $50 million. $50 million. That is a significant amount of money. And the other problem is that it is currently outdated, as we've talked about. There are so many other important things that funding goes towards, such as security and social-emotional learning, the arts and music, which is a huge part of the culture in my school district. And the population has changed. So it's interesting, I went back to the 2007-8 school year, compared to this year, 1920, our enrollment is virtually the same. However, the percentage of students that free and reduced lunch has grown fivefold. In 2007-8, it was about 3%, and currently it is approximately 14%. So certainly the demographics have changed in my district and throughout Long Island, and therefore I would urge the senators to please see if we can come up with a new formula that makes sense, and then it really needs to be followed. The challenging part about, one of the biggest challenges about this is that it makes short-term and especially long-term budgeting almost impossible. I'm not sure what the aid will be for my district this year, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, which makes that very important long-term projection and planning in terms of budget, facilities, and so forth, a very, very difficult thing to do. Thank you very much for listening.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Tyson, Director of the Long Island Progressive Coalition. We are a multi-issue, grassroots, citizen-run organization dedicated to social, economic, and racial justice, which brings us to this issue. I've been in my job for 22 years. We've been fighting for fair school aid formula for low-income Black and brown school districts for every year since I've been in the organization. We are living in the tale of two cities. The Jericho education versus the Wyandanch, the Westbury, is much different. what we see when we go into Westbury, when we go into Copeg, the amount of trying to provide a quality education. I mean, classes in closets, literally, that they're making work. We see such great, people trying so hard, but without those resources, you can only try so hard. When I started working in this campaign, it was well before I ever thought about having kids and seeing a generation of kids being lost in Hempstead, in Wyandotte. Since I've been in my job, we have lost kids. They have not been able to graduate. And it's really your responsibility going forward. And I know that's a huge burden for you. But whatever formula you create, it has to look at the lowest income students, the students who need the most. Because that's what equity is. We're not talking equality. We're not going to get to that promised land with just giving out the same amounts. And so when we look at the changing demographics on Long Island, it's clear, it's changing. And that's why our formula is based on per pupil is key, not who your senator is, which is what the past was. We can't go back there. And that's why we believe this formula works. It needs to be funded. It has not been funded. From the very day that Spitzer came in and did this, it didn't happen. So now we're saying it's not working. Well, let's fund it. Then let's decide it's not working. But at this point, those dollars have to come in. And this was the one issue with the Senate, with the new Senate, that I felt this year we did not achieve. And that was the school funding change. And we expect a lot more next year. We need more. So we really are excited for you to have this discussion. It's wonderful. Let's fix education. Let's help the poor school districts, all districts, like my own daughter. I have a kid in kindergarten in a beautiful school. But my kid should have the same education as the kid of maybe 5 minutes away, in a school district that, in Roosevelt, that I would not put my student in there. And that's what it comes down to. And so it's your responsibility, and all the districts need resources. So it's not taking from one for the other. But at the end of the day, this is Long Island. Our changing demographics are severe, and we're gonna find them. So that's why it has to be per pupil. And we're getting so many students because of our low income affordable housing issue. All the students go in the same places. These districts cannot have 10 students coming in every day. I'm gonna wrap it up.
I get the point.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would quibble with your analysis of what we did last year, and I'd be glad to defend it with my colleagues. We put our heart and soul into doing the best we can. No, let me just say that. We're not the only player in the budget process. We fought to the very end to get as much as we could in foundation aid, doubling the governor's original proposal. We will continue to fight to have full funding of the foundation aid formula. So I appreciate the passion. I think we all share it. That being said, this is really an effort to try to use our collective wisdom to improve on something that we think needs some tinkering and to be fully funded. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Hi, my name is Susan Gotterer. I'm the Nassau County Director of the New York Civil Liberties Union. The work of the New York Civil Liberties Union Education Policy Center focuses on two goals: protecting and expanding civil rights and racial equality in institutions that serve young people, and ensuring public schools live up to their promise as incubators of democracy. I'm also a certified social studies teacher. And yeah, I'm not practicing, but I think I'd love to. So I think what we would like to take my 4 pages and cut them down. We want to look at how the current formula does not address predominantly black and brown districts. New York State may, on average, be spending money on sound basic education, but in reality, not in the right places to guarantee sound basic education for all children, which is the law. And I think that everybody knows that, and that's why we're here. Also, sending more money to all the districts is not necessarily the answer. It has been estimated by Citizen Budget Committee that it would take $80 million to fund the neediest school districts instead of the governor's proposed $1 billion. So I hope that you're taking a look at that as well. Everybody has spoken about the hold harmless distribution, and I think that's an issue that needs to be looked at. What we're seeing in some of the districts, in many districts actually, and I would ask the superintendents here to please check your gatekeepers, is that because of the funding issue, we're getting more reports of the gatekeepers at enrollment asking for documents from families that are not, it's not legal to ask for. And so I really, really implore the superintendents here, please take a look at your gatekeepers, make sure they know the law. And if I would be able to collect your cards afterwards and be able to give you a call if it happens in your district, I would appreciate that. So in other words, the system is set up, the system is structured that everyone's gonna fight for something. It's very tempting for me to say at the expense of somebody else. The structure of the system is set up that way. It's very tempting for me to point out that a school district that has a 3D printer in a middle school right down the road from a very high needs district is not, I think, what we had in mind when we talk about a sound basic education for everybody. And so I don't know how we're going to overcome the structural differences and the structural issues, the silos, even the structural political issue of that the political system is set up to fight for your silo. I don't know how we're going to overcome that, but I really encourage a lot of creativity. So thank you.
Good morning, Senator, Mayor, and to the Board of Regents members that are here, and to the New York State, New York Education Committee and Foundation 8 Roundtable. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Priscilla Zarate, and I am an educator, advocate, and community leader representing Suffolk County Hispanic Advisory Board as chairperson, the New York State Association of Bilingual Education as a delegate, and the Islip Union Free School District as a district administrator, and the New York advocating for fair, full, inclusive resources for multilingual learners, or AFIRM, which is a new coalition formed of the top New York State advocates, including New York State Association of Bilingual Education, New York SABE, the United Federation of Teachers, New York Integration Coalition, the New York Advocates for Children, and a few others. As an educator, administrator who has worked for the largest New York State School District, New York City Department of Education as Executive Director, and the Brentwood Union Free School District as an Assistant Coordinator, and as a parent of a child in a New York State public school, I am deeply concerned about the resources disparities that exist in our schools, because I know firsthand how inadequate resources have affected English language learner communities. I am especially concerned as graduation rates for our English language learners in Suffolk County stands at 29% in 2018, and in comparison to 92% of their English proficient peers. Statewide, the condition of English language learners is even worse. English language learners graduating rate is 29% and dropout rate is 28%. And that is correct. ELL graduation and dropout rates are nearly identical. Yet, as of 2018, New York State schools are owed $4 billion in foundation aid. While schools and educators struggle to make ends meet, it is our minority children, our Black and brown students, who feel the most impact. Currently, 71% of foundation aid is owed to the schools, with 40% of Black and brown students. Failing to fund this formula is not only denying the full worth for our students, but it's also perpetuating educational racism and go against the landmark laws that are supposed to defend these children and provide the resources, like Lau versus Nichols, Castaneda versus Pickards, and the constitutional rights of these students to a sound basic education. And it violates the rights of equity and equitable access to education and opportunities. Many districts and schools are hard-pressed to offer robust programming for our immigrant learners. But the unfunded policies established by the State Education Department, such as requiring schools to open bilingual programs, servicing former ELLs, former English language learners, for an additional 2 years, testing students, providing translation, interpretation services, providing co-teaching models for our students, yet we don't have the bilingual support resources and staffing. And a host of other mandates have left districts and schools to make difficult choices as to what they can or cannot offer their students. Schools throughout New York State that educate immigrant students often have to make choices, such as offering music, art, physical education on a rotation basis, because they cannot afford to offer them on a weekly basis. Furthermore, ELOs are often underserved as schools cannot fully provide the programs they need to thrive as bilingual educators, bilingual social workers, bilingual guidance counselors. And without the robust funding streams that objectively and consistently allocate resources based on needs, even delivering the basic programs required by law and regulations is nearly impossible. As seen by the number of bilingual and educators around the state who are currently teaching our students and are uncertified. The cutbacks in guidance counselors, reductions in tutoring, oversized classrooms, limited professional development opportunities, and trainings for our teachers who service our English language learners also contribute to the many unintended consequences, such as over-referrals of our students into special education. While we recognize...
Can I just ask, are you getting towards the end?
Yes, I'm getting towards the end, yes. So I want to thank you on behalf of Affirm for this opportunity again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that to the conversation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shelley, the superintendent of Baldwin Schools. I will stick to my 2 minutes. I want to start by saying that the theme for mine is a different Einstein quote, and that is his definition of insanity, which is continuing to do the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity. So first I want to thank you. I know I'm preaching to the choir. I think that we need to focus on 2 things. One is money and the other is mandates. In what we do, we have a limited amount of funds. But we can make more funds accessible if we get rid of some of the mandates that cost us the money. And so it's not just about adding more and more and more. It's about being reasonable and rational about the things that we're being asked to do that use up the resources that we can put to better use if we don't have to do those things. And so I want to say as well that in many respects, I think I'm unique around the table, but I think I represent a large percentage of Long Island, which are middle-class communities. And so we continue to hear more and more and more, but the truth of the matter is it's the middle-class communities that get pinched on both ends. I am not eligible to apply for a single grant. I will not get a grant. I do not have a pre-K program. I continue to fill out the application that pre-qualifies, but I never meet the mandate to actually get the grant. On the other hand, I have a community that pays in residential 84% of what is in my budget. That is unsustainable. It cannot continue. And so, how do we sort of meet in the middle? I want to share what I think some of the challenges are. The continued rise in special education. I do not deny my students with disabilities their opportunities, but the cost of special education and the lack of funding for special education is a problem. The number of ENL students continues to rise. We, as a school community, as many middle-class communities on Long Island, we do not have kitchens in our elementary schools because we are walking community schools. And so we had no free and reduced lunch program up until 6 years ago. So in the formula, my free and reduced numbers is 0. But in reality, it's over 30% at this point. And so it's not about adding more, it's about recalculating, because the kids who are in that formula are different than the kids that were in that formula when it began. So it is clearly, you hear around the table, the changing demographics. The increased mental health issues that I think all of us are seeing, it's not just an issue of mental health, it's an issue of funding the resources to provide for the mental health. Issues of safety and security. I went back, it cost my district almost $9 million for safety and security. And I know people think, oh my God, what are you doing in Baldwin? If you all go back and look in your budgets, you're paying the same amount of money. $9 million just for safety and security. Add to that now cybersecurity. Nobody's giving us a discount because we're a school district, but we have the same needs as your multi-million-dollar corporations, but we're not funded the same as multi-million-dollar corporations. Transportation. Up until last year, I had students walking 2 miles to school because in the days of the budget cuts, they increased the amount of mileage. I mean, we tell sort of in our families those funny stories, oh, when I was young, I used to walk 17 miles in the snow, but
But in some cases, it's true. You know, try walking 2 miles in this weather. You know, it's at 7 o'clock in the morning to get to school that starts at 7:15 in the morning. You know, good luck. I also think that, you know, one of the things that has changed is we've gone from homogeneous grouping to heterogeneous grouping. So, you know, and that happened a long, long time ago. But when you're working with kids of varying abilities in one classroom, the resources required are intense. And so you cannot compare 1928, when this formula started, to now. It's different. The last thing that I just want to point out is the needs of our buildings and grounds on Long Island. We are not funded the way upstate New York is. You can go to upstate New York and they have their share of challenges, acknowledged. But we have just had 3 bonds on Long Island that have just failed. In some cases, in very small amounts for very basic things. When we are looking at our buildings, you know, I'm happy to say there's one building in my district that's younger than me. I mean, I'm not real, like, it's insane how old our buildings are. I have a building that's 105 years old.
We know the building.
Right, and so, you know, that costs us. You know, we're looking at $150 million bond coming out. That's in addition to the 85% my taxpayers are paying. So again, just to go back to the beginning, it's about money and mandates and freeing up money that would allow us to reallocate that.
Senator Mayor, thank you very much. I also want to thank Senator Monica Martinez for making sure I have a seat at the table here today. My name is Bob Vecchio. I'm President of the Board of Education for the William Floyd School District, and I'm also co-chairperson of the Legislative Committee for the Nassau-Suffolk School Board Association. Not even going to look at my remarks to keep it short. I'm going to do it off the top of my head, and you might regret that later, too, because my wife says I talk way too much. My school district has a combined wealth ratio of 0.51%. I have over 300 kids homeless. I have over 9,000 students. I'm the 6th poorest or highest need low wealth district on Long Island, the 4th neediest in all of Suffolk County. You would think with that statistics of being that poor, foundation aid would have been something we've been relishing in and being real flush in over the last several years since its implementation. Sadly, that's not true. You talked about the devastating impact of the budget cuts when they came down. We lost $20 million in state aid. We lost over 250 staff members, over half of them being educators. We are a Grammy signature school who cut elementary music as one of our painful cuts. We still have not recovered from those cuts from that devastating Great Recession. The other point I'll make is if full funding of foundation aid was in effect, I would have received $33 million more last year. Not a cumulative, last year. That could have represented a 30% tax relief for my taxpayers, or bringing back some of the vital programs that we cut, or reducing some of the astronomical class sizes that we have. When I was first elected to the Board of Education in 2003, 67% of our revenue came from the state. Last year, 47%. So the effort has been reduced at the state level and placed onto our taxpayers. Here's a point that I'm going to make about the tax cap environment that hasn't been brought up. Our poverty is colorblind too, by the way. We wouldn't be considered black or brown, we're just poor. The tax cap has put a huge disadvantage at high needs districts. And again, we're not talking about robbing Peter to pay Paul. When I raise taxes 1% in William Floyd, I generate about $1.1 million. My neighbors, my alma mater, Sachem School District, who we're going to beat in a few weeks in the Suffolk County Championship, when they raise 1%, they get about $1.8 million. Half Hollow Hills to the west of us, which would be an affluent district, raises $2 million. I can't compete on a long-term level for staff, for resources, when there's an inherent inequitable difference with the new tax cap. Now, foundation aid is supposed to close that gap. Over the last 5 budget cycles, I've received the average increase for the county, the average percentage increase for Long Island. It's not closing the gap. It's making the gap much, much larger. Like it was said earlier, you could slice the pie 16 slices, 8 slices, or 4 slices for big guys like me, but until you make the pie larger, you're not going to address the inequitable position. Mandate relief, she's the preacher, I'm the choir on that one. We need mandate relief. We've done less with more. When I first became board president in 2006, our graduation rate was 67%. This past August, we increased it to 88%. Doing less with more. I want to do a lot more with more, because that 12% deserves the equitable chance that other students in other zip codes get every day. So we welcome the conversation. One thing that I'm going to advocate for my elevator pitch, direct certification for a poverty index as opposed to free and reduced lunch. I have families that will apply for social services but will not apply for free and reduced lunch. Yep. We are a hard-to-count community when it comes to the U.S. Census. We have to stop using those indexes because my community being transient, my community with an ever-growing immigration population is going to be extremely difficult to count in this year's environment.
Yeah, I would,
Okay?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Tracy Hitchens-Boyd, representing the State Controller's Office. I want to thank you. I want to thank Senator Mayer for, and all of the senators here today to continue this conversation about school aid, foundation aid specifically. Our office is responsible for overseeing the financial condition of school districts and local governments in New York State. And I'm sure it's not lost on any of you that our state controller, Tom DiNapoli, is a product of Nassau County Schools. So he is a testimony to the fine things that can come out of these institutions. I'd like to mention that we had the privilege of attending a similar event in the city of Yonkers a few weeks ago and heard some similar themes, but also interestingly, some different issues are emerging here today. I think it's really important that this dialogue is taking place for, as I can understood, the first time in a long time, and it's through these efforts that, it's only through these efforts that we can get to a better place. Our office does a lot of work that can be supportive of continuing and advancing this conversation. Most recently, we released a real property tax report yesterday, along with updated tax levy data. We do a lot of work to help the public and stakeholders understand education aid. And finally, we do some very detailed work in the areas of cybersecurity and school safety. So I would ask that you join us in staying in tune with the issues that you're encountering, and please don't hesitate to reach out to our office to the extent that we can be helpful as you analyze the solutions.
Thank you, Tracy. I just want to thank you, you and the controller. You know, I come from the city of Yonkers, which has had nothing but problems in school funding, and all the issues that have been mentioned here today, and the controller's office has been an ally and an advocate for the students of Yonkers. I'm very, very appreciative of that.
Good afternoon, my name is Cordelia Anthony. I am a teacher at Farmingdale High School. I teach living environment. I've been there for 20 years. I'm also the president of the Farmingdale Federation of Teachers and an ISIP member. I am so grateful to be here today to get a chance to advocate for my over 5,000 students in Farmingdale and of course my over 500 teacher members that are there. I just want to say that since we know that the point of the foundation aid formula was to help, we want to just find an adequate way to continue to help the students, because since it's been underfunded, in Farmingdale specifically, we've been, since the beginning, $86 million underfunded. And in the classroom, day to day, I'm still in the classroom, I see the result of that. I am a co-teacher of living environment ENL, and I see that these students need to graduate. And I watch and see them try year after year at when they first come in as SIFE students or general Ls, and they try over and over and over, but there's not enough resources to help them, as I'm trying to also help in the co-teaching environment these students that are native English learners. There needs to be more, and the foundation aid formula could help that. We now have a growing McKinney-Vento population in Farmingdale of homeless students, and the resources that have to be given to those students to get them to and from different housing locations and busing them to and from different hotels and places where they live is something that's draining the district at this point. We have a slightly decreasing population overall, but a rising increase in the special ed population enrollment. And as you all know, that population is an expensive one to educate. And so I'm hoping to hear today a way for us to dig deeper into the way the formula is being funded, and for all the stakeholders around the table here to try to start coming up with some ideas to try to get some relief for both the students and the teachers of those students. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Kevin Coyne, President of the Brentwood Teachers Association, representing nearly 1,500 teachers that educate almost 20,000 students in the Brentwood School District. I'm thrilled to be sitting next to my superintendent and assistant superintendent of business, because if there's one thing that we are united in is properly funding this foundation aid formula, because it hasn't been. And what we have seen in Brentwood, the deterioration of our ability to provide for our kids, the most neediest kids. I'm really thrilled that Senator Liu is here, who represents the boroughs of New York City, but there is a borough out in Suffolk County called Brentwood, and we educate a hell of a lot of children. And I would agree with the superintendent from Westbury about the creativity, but I think one of the most important issues that we have to talk about is that creativity does not replace resources. And without those resources, we are creating a very, I'm sorry, I lost my words there. We're creating opportunities where students of color are not receiving the same type of equitable education as the community in which I live in. And this funding formula has been broken for a very, very long time. I'm also a member of the NYSET Board of Directors. I know that our NYSET legislative staff knocks on your doors constantly with many, many ideas on how to help fix this funding formula. I urge you to spend time with them. They are the experts in this. I'm not going to rehash what has been done here, and I'm going to leave the details to my superintendent. I thank you for the opportunity. One thing that I think has been remiss is Regent Tillis. I cannot thank the regents for your advocacy last year when it came to budget season and what the regents put forward for what they believed was adequate funding, and I think that's vitally important. I hope they were listening. I'm no doubt you're fighting, but I think that there's an executive in this state who really needs to have you guys knocking on his doors the way we've knocked on his doors. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Coyne. Thank you, Senators. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I am Rich Lochner. I'm the superintendent of the tiny little hamlet out in Suffolk County. We just have a little over 20,000 students. And I'd just like to speak a moment about the foundation aid formula. There is a certain beauty to the simplicity of it. There really is. I know it can come across as complicated, but prior to the foundation aid formula, there were over 30 different formulas that were used. So I do appreciate that they tried to come up with a formula that would meet the needs of the students. However, Brentwood has suffered greatly since the foundation aid formula has come into play in 2007, 2008. I've heard a lot of superintendents mention the cumulative amount of monies that have been owed their district. You have to sit back and listen to this number. Brentwood is actually owed, if we calculate all the way back to 2007, 2008, almost $1.3 billion. That's how much money Brentwood has lost over time. Now, currently, we do have a budget of about $420 million. It's quite a large budget. And I'm very proud of what we've accomplished with that money. So I'm not here crying, saying that, you know, gnashing my teeth, and I do appreciate, however, what the state has done. I think that they have, you know, tried to come up with the monies every year. However, the last few years, I have been a little disappointed in what has owed to us, what has been given to us in terms of foundation aid. However, we do a heck of a job with it. But I do want to give you some numbers. As I sat here today, okay, it's about 12:15, 12:20, I am sure that we signed up probably about 25 to 35 new students just today. By the end of the week, we probably will have seen about 100 to 120 new families come through, okay, the registration office. We do not have a gatekeeper. We welcome every student. We follow the law to the T. We're quite proud of that. We welcome and love every kid who shows up to Brentwood. But Those numbers are pretty staggering. We have over 7,000 ELL students. We have more ELL students than many major cities across the state. We have about 2,500 special education students. We have roughly about 700 SIFE students. I'm going to tell you a little story. When I first started in Brentwood over 20 years ago, I was up at the high school as an administrator. At that time, we had 5 teachers in the SIFE ELL bilingual department. We have 5 teachers. Today, we have almost 50 teachers in that one department up at the high school. So we have seen an incredible increase in the students that are coming to the different type of students. And as you know, and has been said many, many times already today, they come with quite a bit of trauma to us, quite a bit of needs, which we happily meet, and incredibly so. We do a fabulous job, as many of the school districts have said. We're quite proud of what we have done with our monies. But we could use more. We have an 8-period day, we could use a 9. We're not educating everybody in the UPK, we could use more money there. Librarians, I could go on and on and on, but I don't want to do that. But I do want to just mention, you did say that you wanted to just go over today some tweaks to the foundation.
We're going to do it after
Right.
you go around. So
Okay.
I just would ask that you hold that.
Sure. Well, can I just say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I know the direct certification is important. I would like you to consider that the income wealth index. I would like to see if you could remove the floor as well as the ceiling, so it would be better calculated. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Stacy O'Connor. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations at Brentwood. I'm not going to rehash what my 2 colleagues just beautifully stated. Just want to thank the senators for this opportunity to speak, and Ms. Asciutto, who's advocated for us for many, many years. Thank you so much. And just to point out again, we've heard it already, that we have truly lost a generation of students since this Foundation Aid formula has started. They've gone without the opportunities that they would have had this money flowed. So I hope we can put our collective heads together here and really come up with a solution to this. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Bill Johnson. I am Superintendent in Rockville Center. I want to really thank you very much for this opportunity to, I think, share in a discussion about not just what the problems are, but also what may be some of the solutions. I go back to a conversation I had with Todd Kaminsky just recently, who said, Doc, how do we fix this thing? So I think that's really what we're here today. You've heard from a number of my colleagues and a number of really very well-spoken people the dimensions of the various problems associated with this aid. I will tell you that along with George Asciutto, I was part of the ZOB commission that actually produced this thing back in 2007. Its intent is no different than the intent that you hear discussed by the people today. It was to deal with the results of the CFE case in New York City and the inequities that existed statewide. The intent was, in fact, to deal with diversity and equity across New York State. The number of variables that were built into the successful school model really got us into a lot of trouble very quickly, particularly when the resources dried up when the recession hit 2 years later. So I think, quite frankly, you oftentimes hear from us here on Long Island what we call the 17% problem. And very simply, it is that we educate roughly 17% of the kids. We get about 12.5% of the aid. So again, that equity issue is always one that we as a Long Island community try to deal with. The companion piece to this is the tax cap. When the ZOB Commission put this thing together, there was always wink, wink, the opportunity for a school district that didn't get what they thought they might have been able to get to go back to their taxpayers and raise some money. That ended when the tax cap came into place. So the conversation has changed. But we are ready and willing to take a look at some of these variables. I think that we need to address the combined wealth ratio truly understates many of the problems that we have on Long Island. You've already heard about the problems that we have with the underrepresentation of what our income represents, the number of families who live at a single residence whose income is calculated as a single income assigned to that particular residence, So it grossly overstates what income looks like in many of our communities. The regional cost index is one that we really have taken issue with over the years. The 1.4 that exists, we think understates the differences that exist between cost of living here on Long Island and elsewhere in New York State. In addition, special education, I know it has been folded in. The two aspects of the successful schools model was one which is cost, which was modified by wealth, and then needs, which was supposedly modified by various factors associated with different populations of children that would then modify the overall student count. Special education is a particular, and I think statewide, problem that we need to address. Two things have happened actually since this went into place. Number one, the numbers of special education and the percentage of special ed kids in our school districts have risen dramatically. Just to tell you, in Rockville Center, we were around between 9 and 10% a year. We're up over 15% per year. That's a huge difference. In addition to that, the severity of the disability has also changed significantly over that time, and it's not reflected in any of the course data that's used to calculate or to help us identify the needs associated with special ed children. So on that note, I just want to thank you very much for the opportunity. That's really just the start of the conversation. I would hope that these very same people that will very good about explaining the issues associated with their particular school districts stand ready also, as do I, to help put together some of the ideas that need to be addressed down the road.
I have three thank yous. I'm Roger Tillis. I'm the regent from the 10th Judicial District, which is Long Island, Nassau, and Suffolk. And this is my 15th year doing that, which is great because they tripled my salary this year. I want to thank the legislators here for three things. One, for having a hearing here. Two, and for the very important reason, I commend the legislature for passing by large margins the two bills that Senator Brooks and Thomas have introduced, indicating that we need help with some of our districts that really have not been able to shoulder the burden. And anything we can do to get our governor to sign that bill would be incredibly important. The third, I want to thank you for electing me to 3 terms. I just want to mention items. I'm not going to go into why at this point. Certain districts, as I've seen across the island from Riverhead to Westbury, Roosevelt, have had such an influx of immigrants that single-family households now have sometimes 2 and 3 families in them, and it's paying the same tax, but 3 times as many kids. And this is really impacting several of our districts, and those that act like a magnet are really hurting the most. I think the one aspect of the Regents, I'm on the state aid committee of the Regents. And Nan Mead, Regent Mead, is the chair of that committee. But we have to deal, and as a Long Islander, it's been very difficult to be on that committee because we look at the twofold mission of the Regents and of the state is excellence and equity. And excellence, we have some of the most excellent schools and programs, as you have in Westchester, we have here. And we can't afford to give that up. I was on this executive board of Long Island Association, and as a business person, people come here in businesses because of the education quality that we have on Long Island. And if we give that up, and I think the tax cap is one of the problems of that, but state aid is the other, we will suffer as a region. But equity is probably the bigger problem right now on Long Island. I've lived in many places across the country. I've never seen a more segregated place than we have on Long Island. And it is reflected in the education by zip code that we have on Long Island. And we can't continue to do that. I brought the Regents out here about 10 years ago, and we went down roads that were between Half Hollow and Wyandanch, or between Roosevelt and Garden City. And one kid on one side of the street is looking at the other and saying, how come they have all this and we don't have anything here? We've got to do that. So thank you for having this.
Thank you for that.
Hi, I'm Nan Mead, and as Regent Shelley stated, I represent the First District, which includes Manhattan, and I also co-chair the subcommittee on state aid with Regent Beverly Odekirk, who represents the very rural North Country. So we make a good team, rural versus city. You know, my path to the Regents was somewhat unconventional. I was a finance professional, which I guess is how I came to the state aid chair. But later, when I was raising kids in New York City and sending them to public school, I got pulled into education policy. So I just want to say thank you for being here. This is my 4th year on the board. It is my 3rd year co-chairing the committee. Regent Odekirk and I have spent much of that time meeting with stakeholders at the state level, but have not had as much of an opportunity to meet with folks in the field. So I want to thank Senator Mayer and Senator Liu for setting this up, and also the Long Island delegation for being here and for having us here. So thank you.
Am I between lunch? This is
Well,
it?
it's not between lunch, it's great.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Bob Dillon. I'm the District Superintendent of Nassau BOCES, and I thank you, Senator, and your colleagues for being here today. Long Island has 3 BOCES, Nassau, Western Suffolk, and Suffolk. We represent approximately 500,000 students. And what I want to talk about today is really BOCES related, not only to the BOCES here, but throughout the state. One of the big things that we need the BOCES capital projects to be excluded from the salary cap. Many of the challenges and concerns you heard today end up at some point at a BOCES. And if we don't have the capacity and the infrastructure to address those, that's a major issue. The other one is the current aidable teacher salary is $30,000 for CTE teachers to the districts. And that hasn't been changed since the early 90s, and I don't think we can find a teacher at $30,000 today. So that would be great. It would be greatly appreciated if that is addressed. One of the common themes that I've heard here today is the issue of equity. And when you come into a BOCES, I don't care what district you come to, when you walk through our doors, it's equity. Whether you're from Hempstead, Wyandanch, Jericho, Amagansett child at East Hampton High School, you have equity there. The other thing we have is with the changing demographics and population, we offer opportunities at careers that are recession-proof. So the trades, we're trying to say there shouldn't be the stigma of the trades, and we're working very hard at that. And the senators here have all been supportive of that, and I thank them very much, and thank you.
So there's not a real lunch, sorry to say that. The Senate doesn't provide the opportunity to do that, but we're going to take a break, and I think there is some food left, right, Rachel?
Yes.
Okay, there's some food left so please eat and have some coffee, cookies. And we should convene, how about in, what do you say? 10 minutes, according to Senator Liu, and he's a stickler on that. So that would be 1:45. And thank you for what you've contributed so far. So some of the issues that were raised here that are, again, so let's just think conceptually. We and the regions should get a lot of credit. They proposed a full phase-in of the full foundation aid in their proposal. It came over to the legislature. They're not sort of the 3 men in the room, shall we say, although we have a woman in our room. That being said, their willingness to be advocates for the full funding of foundation aid, even in its imperfection, is very, very important, and we appreciate that they continue to push for that. That being said, what we're looking at is the elements of a formula that was, at least by statute, written 12 years ago, that need to be modified in order to more accurately reflect the needs of your district, the needs of the region, which I think have been well described here today, the unique qualities of Long Island in many ways. So we're going to jump into a number of the elements that are in the formula. One of them I think several people raised, and we should just jump into it, is the free and reduced lunch against direct certification. If anyone wants to weigh in on whether free and reduced lunch accurately reflects a need in your district, given sort of two things that we've mentioned. One is some schools have direct certification, so they provide meals to everyone already. Secondly, in our current immigrant environment that has been created by Washington, I know in my district it's very difficult to get parents to be willing to fill out a form that is a government form. So the participation of parents in filling out the form has declined. So I just wondered on the first measure of student poverty, free and reduced lunch, whether that's the right measure, coupled with the fact we're using 2000 census data. So people can jump in, and I know our finance staff is here from the Senate majority taking notes as well. So we're trying to gather the evidence we've heard at all these roundtables. So with that, I will stop. My colleagues want to jump in. You want to say something?
It's just back in my time for the board, too many proud people that were eligible wouldn't apply. It understated that. The other thing we have to think about is we have a growing senior population, and they're struggling. They may have an $800,000 house, but they couldn't buy it tomorrow. By looking at the free and reduced lunch, you're ignoring that community completely. And at the end of the day, as everybody's pointed out, we're funding education by an excessive dependence on residential property taxes. So we're ignoring an important segment of the ability to finance education. That whole, every household that doesn't have a child attending education is ignored. I don't think it works anymore. I think we have to be realistic, and I'll make a second point just since I'm yapping. The value of somebody's house is meaningless too. So many people, if you have two houses next to one another, $500,000 apiece. One has a $450,000 mortgage, the other one's tax-free. Mortgage-free. We tax them equally. For our seniors, and in this community, I can say, in part, there are people that bought houses years ago for $8,000, $9,000. They're now worth $800,000 or $900,000. They couldn't pay that tax. We really have gotten ourselves in a position in this state where far too much of our cost of education is being paid on one small segment of society, the homeowners, and the measurement that they make is not realistic because it's not a reflection of their value. And just one thing, I was upstate a year or two ago playing golf with somebody, and he explained to me how his $2,500 in property taxes was higher than my $11,000 here on Long Island. So I questioned how well their educational system works up there. But his argument was based on the value of his house versus the value of my house. In that same community, when we came out of the golf course, there was a sign that said, "New home, $69,900." How could that be? So I went to take a look. It was a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage, and it was just the difference in regional cost factors we brought up here. So I think the world has changed since these formulas were developed, immigration and others are parts. We really have to change the basis on these formulas. I don't think free and reduced lunch really is a measurement of any value.
A point of that, so. Can you use the mic? Okay, somebody take the mic. Wow, there is a second mic.
We have one here, keep that down.
You have two. So, sort of staying with Senator Brooks's comments, my school district, as well as many that are near, I mentioned that 85% of our budget is coming from a very middle-class residential taxes. Just north of where I am, walking distance from my high school, there's another community whose percentage of residential taxes is 30%. They're far poorer school system. The reason that it's 30% is because they have a huge commercial tax base, and they have the Nassau County Coliseum, and they have the mall. And so one of the ways that And again, I know this may sound like robbing Peter to pay Paul, but it is an undue burden on the communities that get no tax relief or income from the large commercial businesses. And so one of the things to consider is how do you make the commercial income more equitable across school systems?
Yeah, that's helpful to this conversation. Anyone else? Yes, Larry.
As we said before, real estate taxes are regressive. If you look at Montgomery County, Maryland, which is sort of similar to this region in terms of home values, their real estate taxes are 1/4 of what ours are at most. But what they have is a progressive tax system. Whatever your Maryland state tax is, you add 60% on it and it goes to Montgomery County, and that's what they use to fund their schools. So although income taxes are not as steady and predictable as real estate taxes, they are at least more progressive. Because a person who makes $5 million does not pay 10 times the real estate tax to a person who makes $500,000, who does not pay 10 times the real estate tax to a person who makes $50,000, who pays more because they're renters, and renters have a higher rate of real estate taxes. So the entire system is basically skewed to make the people at the bottom pay a disproportionate share.
Yeah, that's helpful. I just should, you should know that Senator Benjamin and I with our committees had hearing in Albany this year with no New York participants, and the goal was to hear how other states balance the cost between income and property tax and between state funding and local property tax. And frankly, at the end of the day, we are sort of in the middle. Some states have a more equitable system of property tax, like you're describing. But this competition of sources of revenue existed in every state, and we were sort of in the middle, I would say, although some states had a more equitably based property tax system, which you sort of. Other comments? Yes, sir.
So what I would get back to, just the opposite of what the superintendent over here just said, our community has little commercial wealth, so on a per capita basis, the William Floyd residents pay a much higher rate in property taxes than some neighboring districts that are more affluent when you look at the economies of scale. The other thing I'll say about direct certification is so critically important as opposed to free and reduced lunch, because again, like I said earlier, people are going to go for the food stamps or the temporary housing assistance. Is there an ability to also take a look at a school district's income taxes that are filed with the state every year, because they have to identify which school district they're in, to measure the true wealth of a community based on their income tax filings, and thereby seeing the economic shifts from one district to another, a period of time over another, because really it's not about real estate. It is a regressive way to tax anything, but it's truly the people's income that's being filed. And I'm just going to throw this out there too, getting back to the tax cap. The tax cap was to reduce spending. To this day, I never understood why we didn't institute a spending cap, because again, it created so much inequity, community versus community, when you were trying to control spending. If you're trying to control spending, why you control the revenue side of the picture without mandate relief just boggles my mind.
Well, just to say that the governor isn't here, but that's probably not the idea, but he would say there is a spending cap statewide, and that's one of the challenges that we have is, even when we identify additional sources of revenue, the executive has tried to limit the growth in state spending, and although education has sometimes exceeded the statewide growth average, that is a big problem for us. We try to identify other sources of revenue, but we are limited in our ability to spend more of it. So there is not a legislatively imposed, but an executive imposed spending cap, which is not perfectly executed, shall we say.
And I might just follow up on Senator Brooks' comment about the free and reduced, not using that. What do you propose as a replacement for that?
I think we've got to do a couple of things. Along the lines, looking at true income, not others. We're in a situation, and you can look at the statistics. The spending rate from school district to school district is dramatically different. You got school districts that are spending $18,000 again. You got school districts spending $46,000. That's influenced by lots of things, special ed kids and all of the rest. I think one of the points you're making out, certainly here in Seaford, is real, is the lack of commercial property. But I think one of the things long-term, we've got to recognize the formulas right now are broken. I think we have to put a limit on how much demand we can put on homeowners. To me, and that's not what we're talking about, just to throw the point out, I think that we should cap residential property taxes to not more than 50% of total spending. Put a cap there. The 2% cap is on spending, but how much of a burden can you put on people? In half the district, you're talking about 70, 80, and 90% of the cost being funded by education. We've got to start to shift that down. We've got to take into consideration regional cost factors. And to an extent, we have to look at how much we're spending for districts. When you have a superintendent in one district spending up, making $100,000, and someone else spending $700,000, maybe we fund the 100 in both, and if you want to go above, you make up the difference. We've got to look at all of that stuff. But I think we've just been over-dependent on the free and reduced lunch, and we miss, like I said, all of the seniors in the different households who are struggling, and they're the ones paying the taxes.
Just food for thought for that. In communities like Brentwood, where we have 3-4 families living in a single household, the free and reduced lunch is a more accurate way of assessing our needs than just the property taxes on a house of someone who decides to own 3 or 4 homes in the community and put 4 or 5 families in each of those legally or not. But it would be a detriment to communities, and I think predominantly of communities of color.
Well, Brentwood is a unique situation, and when I have several districts, Wyandotte, Roosevelt, and others, where immigration is driving the cost. And immigration, in effect, is an unfunded mandate that comes down from the state. You're paying most of that cost by residential property taxes, which have been capped at $10,000 from relief. So the federal government gives you an unfunded mandate and then punishes you for it and increases your taxes. So we've got it. The burden that's being placed on some of these districts with immigration has to become part of the problem.
So I know I do want to actually get into the newly arrived student costs, which is a substantial burden in many districts. But on this issue of how to measure the poverty of the students in your school district, whether you think that the current free and reduced lunch is it, like you're saying, it works okay for your district? Yes.
Yeah.
There are a couple of ways in which we could probably, whoa, holy smokes. All right. There are a couple of ways in which we could probably do that, getting to the issue that John, we have enough information on the incomes of people that are associated with either with their property or as they submit. Part of the problem that you were talking about just a moment ago has to do with the combined wealth ratio, and the income piece of that is really the incomes assignable to properties, not necessarily to families. So when you end up with 2 and 3 incomes associated with this, you artificially raise the value of the income assignable to that community, and you look wealthier than you actually are. That data is all available. I think it just needs to be extracted and, in fact, examined more carefully. And what we can do is create a series of thresholds, or ratios, John, between income that people have and the actual value of their homes, so that we can, in fact, take a much more careful look, not necessarily at poverty alone, but the ability to pay for those taxes. So you take a look at the tax, the income, the value of the property, and there are a series of thresholds that can be built into that based upon the income information that we already have available to us. So again, getting back to the whole issue of whether or not that's poverty, I'm not sure that poverty alone is the issue.
Fair enough. Ability to pay.
Yes, and what many communities are experiencing right now is that when you take a look around the landscape in most of our communities, the numbers of 2-job homes or 3-job homes is increased dramatically in the last 10 years. So there's this artificial sense of more wealth within the community than there actually is.
Yeah.
And I think that can all be articulated and determined.
Thank you, Doctor. I think it's important that in the current context we're in, whatever policies we choose, we understand the ramifications they have, because we are in a world where the pie can only grow by so much because of a spending cap. So when you take healthcare costs and you take the education costs we have, that is by far the lion's share of the budget. There's very little left for anything after that at all, including higher education. So this is not my phrase, but there is not taking one and not taking from another, and you have put it in a biblical term before, but they're taking $1 from one school when Long Island sits at 13% of the shares is $1 from a different Long Island school. And there may be ways where we want to do that makes things more equitable, like Lisa talked about, and in a more fair way. But whatever we do come up with, we should know what that means and decide that's the direction we want to go in. We may be in a world sooner rather than later, where we have a much bigger pie, where there's not a spending cap, where we're able to find different funding mechanisms to go to this. But in this budget, for this April, that's not the world we're in. We're in a world where we're going to have very hard numbers, and we can do our best to push it within the bounds we can, and we will try. And obviously, all these elections have consequences in how much power one group has versus one branch versus who sits there and who sits in what position. All will matter. But right now, a change we will make will impact the district down the road, and it may be in a very beneficial way we want, but this is something we should know up front and discuss over.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add to what Senator Kaminsky said, there's another sort of elephant in the room, which is not related to education, but is a healthcare problem that is sitting out there. And we have tried very hard in our majority not to fight healthcare versus education as sort of competing things, but there's going to be a significant shortfall on the Medicaid side that is going to drive a lot of our budgetary decisions, and we can't leave that out of the conversation because we're going to be forced to try to help sustain our Medicaid program, and that's going to take some of the money. There's not an unlimited pot, as Senator Kaminsky said, and even if there was an unlimited pot, we are in a problem of having to divide as fairly as we can. So that is an important context. Yes, someone over here. Yes.
Senator, I agree with you. I understand. I think everybody in this room understands that there's a limited pot.
Yeah, I know.
And I don't believe anybody feels that we're going to come up with, oh, I'm Italian, my voice travels. I don't know that any of us believe that by April this is going to be resolved. I think we really need to take a look at these formulas and the different aspects of consideration as we move to a new formula that better suits the needs of the districts. So going back to your free and reduced lunch, I don't think that is an appropriate statistic to use. But if you look at all the data that we are made to send to the state, and we had a dinner recently, you know, with our board members and other administrators, Nassau, Suffolk County, and we talked about that with our CIO people who love data more than anything else. They were telling us, you know, we keep replicating data to the state, and it really isn't being used appropriately. So if we could look at that data that best supports us, or create the data that we need. And one of those is, and please understand, I worked in Patchogue Metro for 14 years. I lived and grew up in Brentwood. I'm working in a district that is artificially perceived as high wealth, but also has high poverty. And the needs of my immigrant students are very different than the needs of the Syosset, and Tom Rogers will understand that. I said that to him enough times. So again, the way we weight students based on their needs is one of the factors that we really need to zone in on. The other piece to that is, I know there's a new Census 2020. You're not going to get accurate readings from that. Okay? Not in Glen Cove. And please understand, you hit it right on the head. They are afraid to fill out anything that means they may end up going back to a country they ran away from for all the right reasons. And I deal with those children every day. So we need to really look at accurate data that provides us a good understanding of the profile of student that we serve in each of our districts, and then look at the distribution. As far as hurting other districts, because the pot is limited, I would suggest a multi-year phase-in where maybe other districts need to get a little more creative as well. But I think we can work together, and I'll be more than happy to help my colleagues in doing so.
So I hear what you're saying about, the question I'm hearing is, what can we achieve now versus more of a midterm kind of a situation as you're going into budget season? To me, the things that you can do now is not necessarily generating more money because it's going to come from the limited pot. It's what can you save us in what exists already. So that to me goes to mandate relief. I'm pretty sure that around the table, we can come up with millions and millions of dollars in every district to save. It will cost you nothing more. I'm confident in saying that 50% of the mandates that are out there for us are either unnecessary or burdensome.
Can you give us an example?
And I open that up to everybody, but I can tell you, even most recently, the mandate for the election, polling places, and the new
Early voting.
The release.
The release of the
time.
3 hours. So I consider myself lucky because we didn't have the same kind of problem but there were districts that had 100 teachers that applied, and you did not have the capacity to say no. We had teachers in districts that live in the district they work in that got the mandate, that got the 3 hours off because the district has no ability to say no. Now, in some cases, people have gone to having school on election day. Well, how do you have that many teachers out? Where are we getting the subs from? I mean, it's a whole host of things. The amount of data that we send up to the state, not only is it a ridiculous amount of data, but we need people behind it that are working on that data. The state assessments, whole other story, but the amount of money that we spend in grading assessments are in millions of dollars. There's jump in, guys. I mean, there's
Superintendent,
cybersecurity.
You gave that example.
Why is cybersecurity?
I'm just trying to understand, like, you said mandate relief. How would we? What's been the fiscal impact of those 3 hours, or how would we reimburse?
We meant eliminate it. Somehow.
Create a parameter around it that actually
But has
makes you
that
have to-
squeezed your budget somehow?
Absolutely.
So, Senator, to build on your question, what specifically, right? We know in New York State we have a lot more special ed mandates than what the federal government requires. Probably, significantly more. And what I advocate for plenty of times is, why don't we pilot specific mandate relief that works at William Floyd but may not work at New Paltz? There's a thing called a locally elected board of education with local governance and control. Every time a mandate comes down, that erodes our local governance and control. One of the things that you can fix today, that would be in time for April, is do away with the set-asides that get carved out of our foundation aid formula. I'm a school that's eligible for community schools, and that money now gets carved out of the amount of foundation aid that I get and has to go to a specific purpose. I lose flexibility in where I can put that. The way I've grown my graduation rate over 20% is through flexible ideas that work in my community, but may not work in hers. So why not pilot mandate relief, let a school district come to the region, so let a school district come up to the state senate and say, look, here's what really impacts us to a greater extent than Jericho. Let us pilot it. Give us that flexibility. Trust the local elected boards of education and their district administrations to know what's best with the dollars that are being invested, as opposed to being directed away from the classroom with an idea that listen, behind every mandate is a special interest group that wanted it. So it's tough to take it away, but you know what? Let me take that risk with my local community.
Well, I know there's questions here, but I do want to say on mandate relief. First place, I think we're grouping a whole lot of things. There are regions, administrative rules, there are legislative changes, there are policy changes by the executive. We're glomming them all together.
Hello.
I believe if there are specific things that you think are unduly burdensome or don't grant your district the flexibility you need, you should email us and we will consider them as legislatively separate. But to sort of say mandate relief, some of these are things that, nothing against the regions, but they may have voted as a board to require, and others are legislative things. And I don't think we should get deterred entirely from this conversation of mandate relief, because I think we are open to examining areas where there should be greater flexibility based on the success or needs of your district, and you should feed them to us, but I know you were waiting and then Regent Tillis. Okay, I didn't. Mr. Budak, okay.
So, can I just answer the question about mandate relief? Well, I was chair when we had a special ed committee before it was merged. We did a 3-year study of all the special ed mandates. That's all I was looking for. There were 125 federal, state, regents mandates. I think we came up with, by the time we were done, 2. And the reason is, there's a lot of reasons for those mandates in special education, and if you have a special ed child, you know why they have to have them. So just be careful what you wish for on some of them. And there are plenty of mandates on assessment and other things. I agree with you, but on special ed, be careful.
I think the statements are very accurate. Some of us have actually fought for some of these mandates because we want to make sure that students are being served in the right way. And so I would not like to lump them all in. And it's a very complex discussion that really deserves more time than just this time. However, I want to talk about the children because I know the complexity of taxes, the complexity of homeowners and all these different things, senior citizens. But I think that we have to start talking about the equity that exists among certain school districts. You know, between just, again, I'm Westbury, I'm surrounded by districts that are of wealth, and I do not want to take away from those children. I think those children deserve to have the most appropriate education, but I think that not to compromise the equity that our children deserve as well. And so there does exist an equity gap. Our children, we can send them to private tutors and all these different things. I have to serve my children with their private tutors. It's in my school district. It is their only hope, their only chance to get out of poverty. And so I think that deserves much more of a conversation than anything else. And yes, sometimes it may mean that we may take away from one to give another. It's going to happen because the pot is the pot. But I think that at the minimum, we should discuss this equity gap because our children deserve to go to college. They deserve to have the right education. They deserve to have the tutors they need to get into the fine institutions that every other parent may have the ability to do for them. So if we can talk about that, I think we'll start in the right place and then we'll talk about money because everybody pays some way of those taxes. You may not be a homeowner, but you pay a whole lot of rent in my community to somebody that's not paying that kind of taxes. So there's a lot to be discussed here. But let's start with children, I would say.
Okay, yes.
It also seems though, it seems though a lot of the programs, like community schools, pre-K programs, are all in a competitive grants program, as opposed to it should be standardized. And so if a district does not have a good grant writer, because they can't afford one, they can't even compete for these. And so I think over the past few years, a lot of the stuff we have been fighting for just goes in these competitive programs, which really is not the way it should be, and it should be accessed by the districts that actually need it.
I mean, we have tried very hard on that to reject the idea of competitive grants altogether for community schools, which I think is one of the more successful models that have been developed, as well as for pre-K outside of New York City, for full board. The idea that New York City is fully funded and the rest of us are competing for a very limited pot of money for districts that want it. Our conference went back against that, we'll continue to do so. But to your point, Doctor, I think it is important that we talk about the equity gap. We do want to talk about it. So again, on the measurements of your district, for example, in terms of what is an effective measurement of poverty in your district?
It would be based on families. Family by family. It cannot be done just on the wealth ratio. I know for Title I, it's not measured correctly because our high school sits in a very rich area.
I see.
So you cannot measure it. We serve every other student outside of that area. But when they lump the geographical location, they include Old Westbury, which is where my office is. And we are not wealthy whatsoever. So So there is a lot, like I said, to be discussed, because there's specific things that, I mean, I have East Williston next to me, I have Jericho, I have all the districts surrounding. So it depends on how those things, I would say family by family.
Can I just ask a question? I'm trying to understand your situation a little better. First of all, I just want to make a note that what Lisa mentioned about the competitive grants, that's kind of like opposite of what Bob was saying about getting rid of mandates. It's kind of like opposite if you think about it. All right. This Westbury school district, you said you take in a lot of lower income students from the area, but you're sitting amidst mansions?
Correct.
So,
So,
but what, the tax base, does that exclude those mansions?
No.
Okay, so it includes mansions, you got a pretty decent tax base,
but
even though none of those kids may go to your school, but you take the surrounding kids, but you still have a pretty good tax base there, don't you, or am I missing something?
yes, but my free and reduced lunch, we're talking about free and reduced lunch, how do we measure that?
Yeah.
It doesn't equate unless you go family by family. I would have to.
Okay, I mean, I agree with Senator Mayer that the free and reduced price lunch measure is probably obsolete, especially since a lot of districts nowadays offer it universally free, so nobody's applying. Not to mention the immigrant factor. But even if you kept that factor, it is still family by family. You're still counting the number of kids who get free and reduced price lunch.
In your district.
We do.
In your district, right. So it is part of the current formula.
But the poverty rate is different.
The poverty rate is also counted in the current foundation formula based on headcount, really, according to the census. We may want to update that census.
2000 census.
Right, we may want to update that census, but it's still based on census.
If we could just, can I ask you, are you considering adjusting the income wealth index? I mean, I mentioned before that there's a floor and there's a ceiling. We're well below the floor in Brentwood, so I'm wondering, is that part of the conversation?
I mean, that's part of our conversation. I don't know what we're considering, what we hear.
Right.
This is really a hearing for, so walk us through the impact of having the floor for you.
Well, I believe the floor is 0.65%, and we're in the 0.3s. So obviously, you get moved up to the 0.65, so it's not giving a true representation of our wealth index. Now, I understand too that the cap is a 2.0, and that there are districts that are over a 2.0, and obviously they come down to a 2.0. So that obviously adjusts their income down. So that's the disparity, and that's why I'm wondering if you guys would consider adjusting that.
Well, we've heard it raised in other places,
Right.
that both the ceiling and the floor are problems.
Right.
They're not accurate reflections of the wealth of your district.
Correct. And also, you mentioned the 2000 census. Obviously, our population has really changed dramatically since the early 2000s. So I'd like to see, obviously, a true representation of our population in the next time we calculate the foundation aid formula.
You could do that with.
Can I just do it on registration?
Senator Blumenauer.
I mean, I just want to point out some technicalities.
Here's the mic, why don't you?
Just to point out some technicalities in the formula. First of all, do you know if you're based on the income wealth index, or are you actually more based on the state sharing ratio? No, because in extreme cases, the state sharing ratio kicks into play, right, as opposed to the income wealth index.
We're on the income wealth index, not the sharing.
So your expected contribution is higher than what you really,
Yes,
that's correct. And, I think the only one that really is an outlier is Scarsdale. Scarsdale is like, they're through the roof. That's why they get capped at 2. But even if we got rid of the cap for them, it's because they're such a relatively small area, it's not gonna be a huge help in the whole statewide formula.
The top cap, you're talking about the top.
Yeah, the
top.
2 as opposed to the 0.65.
Can I just ask questions about the census? So the current data is for poverty is the 2000 census. We all have some skepticism about the 2020 census, which will be done in time for this year, but there's other data that reflects what we think it might be a better measure of poverty in your community. Could be the community survey, which is updated more regularly than the census data. In each of your cases has your, well, I won't ask them, some people have had population growth in their district, other people your enrollment is flat, but your need is greater because of either immigration, ENLs, special needs. Are there other measurements besides the census data that you think would be appropriate measurements of the need or poverty in your district? Yes.
You have bed stay data, okay, which in a transient district, you're saying there's a lot of, and again, William Floyd, Brentwood, Patchogue, Medford, but you can take that point in time, because those leaving and those coming in, it'll equalize to a certain degree. And if you're looking at a phase in, that information is relevant if you're able to understand the movement within those districts. I have high wealth, I have high poverty. In the last 10 years, not 20, but in the last 10 years, my population profile has gone from 43% white to 24%, and Hispanic and ENL population both to 62% from about 40%, okay? So my enrollment has increased, my profile has changed, and my wealth has diminished. So if you take the census from 2020 and the free and reduced lunch, you're not getting the right numbers.
Other points on this?
I'm trying to really understand this stuff. But your ELLs, you get an extra factor of 0.5 for each of those students.
Not really.
Why not?
If you look at how it's coming in faster than it's going. It's not coming in as fast as the increase in our population.
Because of the 1 year lag?
It's
There's only a
more
1
than-
year lag.
But it's actually, it's impacting us.
Oh, because it's,
Go
because
ahead.
they're still using 2000 census numbers?
That's
Is
correct.
that-
That's correct. And some of it,
Well, okay.
I mean, I could sit with you and go through all of that data, which I will be more than happy to do. And, again, I extend the invitation of having a subgroup of assistant superintendents and superintendents come sit with you.
Well, hold on. I mean, the poverty threshold is based on 2,000 numbers. ELLs, I mean, that's not based on any census numbers. If they're English language learners.
Okay, but you're looking at ELLs from another district. I'm an ELL student, okay? But I have been educated since I was in kindergarten in the United States. I have students who are coming that are 17 years old, that are my new freshmen, who have interrupted education. So that's a
Differentiating between different degrees of.
absolutely, because it's not only ELL, it's differentiating between different types of education that they've come with. I have an 8th grader who has never been to school, can't even write his name.
Okay.
We've heard that.
That's the issue.
And that's
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
I think when you combine that with the social emotional needs of the children when they come in, at whatever age, you have to hire more staff. You don't have the number of students per, let's say, counselor or per psychologist or social worker has tremendously changed since, I guess, we were going to school. The needs are different, and we've learned a lot from mental health practitioners to know that we have to address the needs at an early time so that we don't have to address it later. So in terms of basic needs of our students, it has to be met upon them entering our schools. We don't have the time or the luxury to wait and see what's going to happen. Followed by our building structures. So my high school was built for about 1,100 students. I have 1,700 students. I just, thanks to my community, they passed a
You're
bond.
living in the luxury of space.
Well,
You're only 50% over.
you may think, my ratio was 92% based on the 77.7% that the state has issued as a utilization.
Yeah.
We just built, or we're building now, we're almost opening up a a new wing, thanks to the community for supporting us with a bond, which is gonna increase their taxes. Or even if it is tax neutral bond, there's expenses such as custodial staff for this new wing. The square footage has changed. You have more paper, you have the bathroom, you have water, you have every utilization of that space is going to increase our budget. So all these different things are what's really driving the budget coming up, but not enough foundation aid to support some of the staff that we need.
I think to an extent, the profile of some of these school districts are changing so fast. Yes. And on a daily basis. I was at Wyandanch one day, I walked in, Mary's yelling down the hall at me. She picked up 180 kids in one day. There's no way to have the aid in there. As you pointed out, you've got a situation where you're getting students 16, 17, 18 years old that don't understand the language, and then we're saying by 21 we want them to be able to understand English and complete, it's not happening. So I think a lot of the data, a lot of the old methodologies, because some of these districts, the profile has changed so much, they're absolutely obsolete. And we've got to really think about how we're going to measure that. We've got to recognize the different changes happening in school districts that are influencing the cost. Like we said, a few people, you know, commercial property versus non-commercial, the changes in the profile, the changes in the special needs, and they're happening in some districts on a day-to-day basis. I sat down with Roosevelt School District 2 years ago. We did just a fast back-of-the-envelope calculation. Well, what it looked like is 65% of the cost of education was just from immigration. They were getting kids coming in the door every other day. We don't have a fund that flips you money because of the mid-year addition. We don't have funds that recognize the additional problems that come with these kids because of what they've experienced in the transition. We don't recognize the demographic changes, complete reversals in certain districts. So we're dealing with numbers that are almost 20 years old in a sense with the census, to districts that are changing dramatically in a matter of 2 or 3 years. Wyandanch grew in 5 years by 28%. They've got 15 classrooms that go to another school district because they don't have enough room. So this stuff is changing by the minute, and we're going to have to recognize that.
I also add to that you have to recognize the issues, whether it's immigration or just high needs too, right?
Yeah,
poverty, whether you're new to this country or not, also comes with a higher cost for education. So you absolutely have to adjust the weighting for a classified high needs student in addition to the
Yes, yes.
I would like to add, when the state funds our school districts, they're always looking at a year behind, data from a year behind, so they're not looking at current data and enrollment ELO data. One of the things that the New York City Department of Education did was to add an additional ELO weight for students in different programs, in different grade levels, meaning elementary versus secondary, and also in terms of different student needs, whether you're SIFE, long-term L, and then it took that into consideration, which helped our school districts in New York City to be able to support the salaries of teachers, to be able to support additional resources into the classroom. So I think an ELO weight has to be considered in addition to per capita, per student funding.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think 2 points here, both in ELLs, different weighting, and in special needs, a more nuanced weighting based on the need of the students are things that we could look at doing. I just want to say that our experience, I think, in the Hudson Valley one, and this is a similar thing. The inner ring of New York City suburbs have experienced a dramatic change in demography and in need and in poverty over the last 15 years. And frankly, I don't think the Foundation Aid formula sort of recognized the world changed and continues to change for the suburbs around New York City, which are really dealing with these changes in terms of the student population. So I think this point about more nuanced weighting within ENLs is a very good point. Anyone else want to mention that?
No, I mean, I think that's a great outcome of this conversation, is that I think we all realize that not every L is created equal.
Yeah.
That we should have a different set of needs. then I know that there are some districts in Nassau County that are actually getting quite a few immigrants in. But they're not coming from South America, they're not 17, 18, 19-year-olds that haven't been in a classroom for 2 or 3 or 4 years or even longer. So it's a great conversation to have. Our kids are extremely needy, and I'd love to hear if you would possibly look into adjusting the formula to recognize the differences.
But they are coming.
Yes, they are coming.
Well, oh, no, I understand they're experiencing that.
Yeah, Glencoe has got the same problem.
I love Glencoe. But I will tell you that my surrounding districts are starting to see this as well.
Sure.
So we talked about Wyandanch and Roosevelt and Brentwood and Glencoe, but Oyster Bay and Levittown and some others have seen this particular year a number of, and I could tell you because I have tracked data on my own, where we looked at when we get the influx of immigration students through the school year and what we have done as a result. But this year, it has been, without question, the most significant in increases in enrollment from September, where we usually get them in November, December, January. And I am speaking to colleagues across Long Island, they have never seen an increase this way, and others have never seen new students coming in with that background in particular areas where they're not commonly known.
Yes.
So I hear Regent Phyllis over there, and so I'm going to echo what I think you're thinking. As much as there is a disparity within the ENL population, there's equal disparity within our special ed population. So I can have a student who requires, speech twice a week, or I can have a student that is in a private placement at $150,000 a year. And so I think that disparity is equal in special ed. The other thing that I have to keep bringing to the table is that where there is a significant pinch on Long Island is in the middle class communities. We are talking about Wyandanch and Hempstead and Roosevelt, and I get that. I do not disagree with that. But your Baldwins and your Rockville Centers and your Farmingdales are communities where 90% of the residents are paying 90% of that budget. If you look at what we get from the federal government in Title I, Title II, Title III, we're ineligible for most of it, and we get a little bit on the other part. When you look at what we can get in grants, you'll see nothing. When you look at equity, and you talk about equity, there is no one here that can't say that my community is not equally deserving of a pre-K program that my neighbor to the left or my neighbor to the right is. And so my plea to you as our senators is to not forget the middle class on Long Island. The middle class is the bread and butter of this region. And if we forget that we get no commercial space, that our residents are challenged, that we have no pre-K, that we have the same special ed needs, we have similar ENL needs, maybe not as severe as certain communities, but we do, and we have less to work with. I have to echo that.
I think the point is well made. The only thing I would say is, again, we're capable of doing more than one thing. We are focused on equity because we represent the whole state of New York, and we understand that is a tremendous challenge for our districts, and we have districts that simply can't even get to the level of sound basic education because of inequity. At the same time, we're very mindful of the burden on our middle-class families. I mean, as much as people didn't like it, the reason we made the property tax cap permanent, at least for me, is we cannot burden our property taxpayers anymore to carry the weight of public education. So we're capable of doing both things. I think we're very mindful. We have a moral responsibility on equity that we take it very seriously, and now that we're in the majority, we want to try to do our best on it.
I think you also need to think creatively, right? So if you have a whole division of higher education, and you have communities that need ENL teachers or would know better than pairing up an ENL, then why are we not looking at the wider system and saying, because it's not always about money.
right? There are places that get a lot of money and they're not using it well. So how can we leverage other parts of the system to provide the help that certain those communities need to give that equal education? You know, how do we partner higher education with some of those communities so there's a second teacher in that room and not have to pay for a second teacher?
No, good point.
Well, I just want to echo what Senator Mayer has said. You know, we can do both, and we have to do both, because we clearly have to solve these problems of equity. I have some of the wealthiest school districts in the country in my district, and I have some of the poorest. And they all have similar problems, and they all have different problems. But I think our obligation is to address both, because the problem we have, Senator Brooks mentioned it earlier, is this limitation on the deduction of our state and local taxes to $10,000 is dramatically reducing our overall revenues that we have in the state to give out in state aid, but it is also impacting votes in school committees. I had two of my districts lost bonds that some of them in prior years would have easily passed, because people are going to be voting budgets down, unfortunately. So what we have to do is make sure that at the same time we are fixing the foundation aid problem, we are also getting sufficient additional funding to school districts, and I think above and beyond the whole harmless, to make sure that we're dealing with cost of living increases, because we don't want to start seeing a decline in some of the other districts as well.
I just want to make a point about, you mentioned UPK before, and I've been on the Regents Board from targeted through UPK, and now it's UPK. But I've seen so many districts on Long Island who have actually not gone into the UPK because they would have done it for their targeted kids. They just don't feel that everybody should have that question. So it's a question of equity even within a district that gets affected by UPK versus targeted pre-K or competitive pre-K. I don't know how to resolve the question without going after specific kids. And that's really what we need to do.
Yes. One thing that's missing here is there's a lot of districts that are losing kids. And there are opportunities. When we really look at the system, I mean, the thing about New York City, you're one district, right? You could look at all the buildings together. How do we run the system together? We have 25, 26 districts. There's a ton of buildings, but right now, there's going to be a lot that are empty. My district, Belmore Merrick, BOCES is renting one of the facilities. We're going to find this. So certain districts are getting overburdened, right? They don't have enough room, and there are other districts with too much room. But because the problem that we do not want to consolidate, we do not want to mix black, brown, and poor and wealthy kids together. But there is an opportunity out here. I'm not sure this is the group to get there. But we have to look at, the next 20 years. Things are really changing, and we need to plan to get there.
I would say the issue of some kinds of consolidation or more creative thinking has come up in every roundtable that we've been in, including, dealing with some of the rural districts which are suffering substantial declines in enrollment and are struggling with whether they should consolidate. And it's one of the things we need more flexibility with districts to consolidate, in my opinion. Money alone is not the answer. I think we're talking about money, but everyone here knows money alone is not the answer for greater success. Yes.
Yeah, if I could just respond to Senator, when you were talking before about the formula and the 0.5 and the various elements of the formula, I'm going to go back to the Solano Commission, which I also served on back in the 1980s. We bumped into a wall. And I'm not sure when you begin to listen to the stories here, that no matter what we do with the elements that are within the formula, in the short term, are in fact going to enable us to respond to some of the needs that we're experiencing right now in a much more rapid fire way that we've never seen before. The L population and the special ed population, we may have to take a look at and walk our way outside of the formula a little bit and begin to examine ways outside of the formula in which some of these things can be dealt with, either on a more effective way and possibly more rapid. Having worked with the formula many years ago and looked at it every year since then, just massaging, going from 0.5 to 0.7 to 0.8, I mean, how do you rate these kids? When you begin to take a look at the actual stories that are being told here today, is there a way in which we can begin to allow them to dip into a pool of money, either on a more rapid basis? And I think we have to kind of step outside of the formula and take a look at ways in which that can be addressed.
I mean, dipping into a special pool of funds versus including them in some kind of formula, it really nets out to be the same thing. And, one thing that you could consider, and I know our chairperson has been thinking about this also, is if you look at New York City, you know, once New York City gets its foundation aid from the state, it then goes through this whole relatively complex fair student funding formula, which actually is not, you know, it's not that different from, it's somewhat different. It's not that different from the basics of this formula. It's just different in that instead of 3 or 4 factors, there's like 24 factors that then start to grade some differentiation between English language learners or different levels of special needs students, things like that. So it might be something that we need to look at the state, and that would better calibrate the amount of fair foundation aid to how much your schools are actually needing to spend to educate these kids.
But we actually have the structure in place in which services can be layered into school districts. Not to tout what we do here in Nassau County with BOCES. I know it's a little bit different in the city and how you provide that other layer of service. But there are ways in which possibly this can be looked at from a regional point of view, not necessarily by district by district.
Yeah, hi. I just want to talk about. That one doesn't work.
Doesn't feel right. Okay. I'm going to say something radical, which I think everybody knows here, but it's important that we say things. The people in this room, I'm really blown away because they're spending their lives growing and educating humans. They're taking on more responsibility for different aspects of these humans. The amount of hours that these little humans spend in the buildings is unbelievable. And yet when we look at our state priorities about where we put our money, I think that we need a huge cultural shift. And I don't know if it's going to happen, but when you look at the budget and you look how much are we spending on law enforcement, how much are we spending on security, cybersecurity, which of course the ACLU has quite a bit to say about that. Please come see me after the meeting. How much are we spending on prisons, right? So I would just implore everybody in this room to keep the bigger picture in mind. What are we valuing in our society? That's what a budget represents. What are we valuing and who are we valuing? And so as a stay-at-home mom, boy, did I feel undervalued. I was just growing a human. We know what that's worth. But everybody in this room is being undervalued. So I suggest that we all keep that in mind and work as hard as you can to make the culture change. I just think it's important to say these things, even though it feels like it's, how could that possibly ever happen?
No, look, I think we feel, I don't want to speak for all my colleagues, but as a majority, we were elected to make a change, and it is not something that happens overnight. Government is an incremental process, all of us know that. We are committed to a long-standing fight. We will continue to disagree with those we need to disagree with. It's not about personal, it's about our priorities, and we'll continue to fight for education and healthcare. They're the biggest chunks of the state budget. We're going to continue to try to do the best we can, and in the process, we heard that people wanted to be heard on the way the funding was distributed. This is a direct response to hearing that people had a voice that had not been heard. And that's the reason we're doing this. But I think the underlying commitment to education as a priority, it couldn't be greater than our conference.
Yes. I just want to,
clarify, with the fair student funding in New York
Yes.
City, I definitely think you should look at that because what's beneficial is that it's definitely differentiated for the students. So if you have an ELL who has also special education, now you're gonna get not only a weight for ELL, you're gonna get a weight for special education, but you're gonna also get an additional weight if that child has AIS or is a psych student, or, you know, a former ELL. So there are different ways that added together can be a very good resource for our school districts.
Yes, good point, yes.
So, first of all, I don't know how many people watch the Hudson Valley Roundtable. I'm looking at it right now, only 38 views, which is really a shame, because it's time well spent for 3.5 hours. But I will say this, a lot of the things that you spoke about then certainly are surfacing right now. Clearly there are a lot of common denominators that we can all agree with. Not to play administration 101 and throw a question back at all of you, wonderful senators, but is there something that you think is short-term feasible and then longitudinally something that we can really collectively get behind? Because I think there's the, tinkering around the edges, and then there's really just like a systemic overhaul. At this point right now, what do you think is probably most feasible? Is it tinkering around the edges or systemic, and then is it more of some of the things that you would say common denominator-wise that you heard that you're like, you know what, this is something we can probably do at this point?
I mean, I would just respond by saying that at the end of the next one in Queens and hearing, where we're gonna hear the state sort of institutional players in the education space, we'll be better able to sum up what we think both our short-term and long-term responses are. I don't wanna get ahead of ourselves. We have heard common themes in the suburbs surrounding New York City, no question about that, as well as sort of our upstate cities and cities in particular distress, as well as our high-achieving suburban districts. I mean, as Senator Brooks said, there's really a range of different needs. I don't think we know the answer yet. Sorry. No. Oh, no. Oh, you can talk about it.
One of the proposals I have, as I look at it, and I look at the disparity about the state, and granted, we've got differences in commercial property taxes and various factors, but I'd like us to cap the share that can be funded by school districts via residential property taxes to 50% of the total district spending. And that we shift the difference into some additional state aid. That would not change any of the state aid formulas. Districts would continue to get what they're getting in state aid, but it would lighten some of those districts that are paying the funding, say 90% of the cost of education. And that's twofold. The whole idea here is to shift the burden, but also recognize that those districts that are in the 60, 70, 80% self-funding are the ones being most adversely affected by the new federal law. And in this state, we sent to Washington an additional $15 billion because of those changes. We could use that money here. So we don't have a quick change, but if we made that cut and put the residential limit capped at 50%, it would provide tax relief for many of you. It would lessen the penalty because of the new tax law. And it would buy us time until we really change the way we fund education. I mean, we're discussing here so many new variables that weren't there a few years ago, certainly long before the formulas were developed. We've got to make a change. But people got crushed today all across this state. And we've got to know when you take $15 billion, pick our pockets with $15 billion at one shot, we can't be throwing money all over the place. We know we have to make change. I think this would help. And what it would do is it would shift the principal funding source of education away from residential property taxes, in effect, to income taxes, but on a statewide basis. You know, we've got the majority of education right now being funded solely by people that own homes. It's unfair, and again, with the new tax laws, we're being punished for that. So I don't see that as a long-term fix. I think that's something we could do for, say, 3 years, and in that time, really sit down and come up with a better way to fund education. And if the federal tax laws are not going to change, we've also got to recognize did some fast math to bring everybody down to 50%, going back a couple of years, which was just over $2 billion. But it will give a lot of tax relief to people, and it'll back off on some of that tax. It's not the long range.
Can we skip to a little bit to the regional cost index? Several of you brought that up. Anyone want to comment on the regional cost index as applied here to Long Island? I thought someone had brought it up earlier.
I did.
You did.
It's at 1.4, it's really the highest in the state, but nevertheless, I think that,
Yeah, we Westchester people would like to hear you.
I just think it needs to be examined again, and what we need to do is do another study to find out if in fact, and the data is there to be able to, I get, what do you throw into that index? And what is it? I mean, what you were just talking before, John, about the housing plays a critical role in the differences that exist between us and our upstate colleagues. So that I think it's probably worth doing. I don't want to pretend that I have the answer at this point, but I think most of us who live here feel the difference.
Okay, I mean, we got to keep things realistic, right? When you say feel the difference, what does that mean? It's not high enough? It's already the highest. New York City and Long Island are the highest. So, and having a high regional cost index gives a higher foundation aid. So it'd be kind of hard to say to our chairperson who's from Westchester, the Hudson Valley, hey, we should be even higher. Or we should have an increase higher than her or other areas get. I'm just saying that we're going to keep that in mind.
We recognize that, and that's why I say it needs to be studied. I'm not saying right off the top, but when we say we feel it, we feel it because, as you've heard around the table, there is unanimous support for the concept that we are getting less than what that, and I would say that many of our kids, back to what Dr. Budai had said earlier, when you begin to focus on the kids and ask yourselves, demographically, we are a very different place than we were even 10 years ago. And that's why we feel it. And so, whether we get, I'm not sure that we can just get more or more of the same pie. That's a whole debate for another day. But the indexes, or the indices that are currently in place, I think need to be re-examined.
Can I ask another question on those that have not recovered from the gap elimination adjustment cuts? For example, and I wonder in your district particularly, like when we had cuts and things were cut within your district, are you back up to where you were pre-gap elimination adjustment? Any of you? And can you just describe some of the reductions that have not been restored? You tried, as we did finally restore the gap elimination adjustment. Are there specifics? Yes, Lorraine, that you can give us?
The Long Island Education Coalition
We continue to survey to see what's going to happen when money is restored with programs being restored. And what we've seen on Long Island is during the last 3 years, virtually all of the restoration of funding towards programs has gone to the mandates with regard to English as a second language and bilingual education. Restoration of some programs has been established. Very few districts have had the ability to put money towards new innovation or new initiatives. So we were quite surprised because we thought that at some point the turnaround would be there. But the money, quite frankly, is going to the programs that schools are mandated to provide services for. And for Long Island, it has been basically programs for English as a second language.
Others on that, on the issue of restoration?
William Floyd, like I said earlier, we lost probably over 120 teachers. So we more than made up for the enrollment drop with that cut right there. And today, we have not made up the loss of that faculty. Forget the institutional knowledge and some of the talent that we lost. We are still down teachers, so we still have some of the highest class size averages, if you will. There are certain electives at the secondary level that were not restored, that were lost. So again, getting children ready for the next step beyond that. So when we lost that $20 million in aid, if my community did not agree to 2 years of tax rate increase, pre-tax cap of 19%, the cuts would have been even far draconian than that. And thank God they allowed us to increase the tax rates over those 2 years just to tread water. And we still have not recovered. We remind that to our community every time that we go out. We thank them for what they did during those 2 years, but we are far from optimal from prior to where the most cuts took place.
Others, yes.
So we went from one period day to one period day across school, and that has not been restored. And that might sound simple, but it is that extra period in the day that most kids get their joy from, right? And so, one of the things that we've been talking about is moving away from mandated courses to more joyful, rigorous, elective courses, and though that is what's missing, and particularly at the middle school level, when we know kids go through a pretty rough time, you really need to have some of that joy in there. For me, that's an example of both mandate relief, and that might be Regents and state ed, but it's a combination of mandate relief and extra resources.
I just want to dovetail on the 9-period day. We don't have it in our middle schools, and we try to have it in our high school. It's a very common conversation we have together. But what I can also tell you is that reduction from a 9-period day to an 8-period day has had a tremendous discriminatory impact on our ELL kids, our bilingual students, our psych students. We are talking about kids who, because of mandates, don't have enough room in their schedule to have a lunch period, 40 minutes off. And I look across the way to Dr. Hines, who's about the whole child in this free play movement. Forget free play. In our high school, we have kids who are 8 periods a day because of the mandates connected to being a psych student or an ELL. They don't have any opportunity to have the joy of being in an art class, being in a chorus, or being part of a music program. So, these cuts have killed us, and we have, like William Floyd and many others, never recovered. And what is happening is we have within the system in Brentwood, despite our very best efforts and creativity that we talk about, we have 2 different educational systems under the same roof. Those for students who aren't bilingual or ENL kids, and those kids who are what I call Gen Ed, and we know there's no such thing as a Gen Ed student anymore. So it has been horrendous impact on our schools and created a 2-tiered education system under the same roof. It's very sad.
If I can just add just a little bit about what it's done to the teaching staff. On top of that seeing this, we talk about social emotional learning. There are teachers suffering watching this happen. I've only been teaching 20 years, but there's people, we've seen the change, the shift, and the impact on teachers who are seeing what's happening to the students day after day. It's causing them their own social and emotional problems. And we're seeing teachers, like we were discussing earlier, burning out, trying to do all of these tasks for students because we're down teachers, and it's impossible. Or the teacher in the classroom without a co-teacher who has a psych student who is 17 in 8th grade and has to try to differentiate for a student who can't say, I live in Farmingdale, and is still trying to teach a Regents 8th grade course. It is a burdensome task on top of what everyone's mentioned. I know all the superintendents hear this from their teachers and their teachers' unions on a regular basis, but they don't have the funds to hire that extra teacher to co-teach. And so, this underfunding is really a multi-layered problem, I'm sure you know.
I just want to say, in some cases, it has led schools to actually place teachers out of license for at least a year to be able to cover classes because of we're not able to hire regular teachers because of the
New York City, you're in.
I'm in New York. I used to be in New York City. I'm in Long Island.
Oh,
but I've worked in the schools.
Yes.
Yeah,
going to, not necessarily the formulas or anything else, but the regions are undertaking a couple of things now that might have significant cost implications, although that's not why we're looking at them. One is we're looking at a new way of testing our kids. We're looking at adaptive tests. We're looking at different kinds of tests, which might have, I mean, the amount of money that districts spend on the testing itself, no less preparing for the test, no less grading the test, is significant. And that's one, hopefully within the next year, we will have a different system. The second is we're looking at really revamping, starting from scratch, our graduation requirements. We are not satisfied necessarily with passing 5 Regents tests as being the be-all and end-all. And so all around the state, there are groups meeting, Regents will be meeting with different people to talk about what is relevant education, whether or not we need to have high-stakes testing as part of that, which again might have cost implications. Whether or not we go to subjects such as information literacy, financial literacy, civic education, civic engagement, are things that, you know, might actually cost money because we've got to retrain some people, but in the long run, our de-emphasis on some of the high-stakes testing, I think will possibly and hopefully decrease the cost of some of the things that we do.
Yeah, first I'd like to say I do appreciate the regions and the commissioner when they did institute the alternative pathways. You know, Brentwood in particular obviously benefited very much from the different ways that students can graduate. So we do certainly appreciate that. To reiterate some of the things that we did lose, obviously the 9-period day was one of them, and I do talk to the BTA president, you know, on a weekly basis about getting that period back, but I obviously can't do that until I have a level of certainty that the amount of aid will increase, because I have a big fear of bringing on that 9-period day and then obviously pulling it back within a year or two. We have this conversation going on about the L's and lots of different things. I would like the senators and obviously the regents more so to consider another impact on a district like Brentwood, and that's the way schools are identified. And we've been talking about unfunded mandates. We are actually, we have 4 out of the 18 schools are identified. And it's no shock that when they came out with a new identification system that, lo and behold, Brentwood would be, you know, in the bottom 10%. And that severely impacted us last year and going into this year. 4 schools that demanded a large part of their staff to get not just through the training, but they also had to be part of the school improvement plan, which we've actually benefited tremendously from it. But I would like the regions to consider factoring in our different populations. See, we're measured the same exact way as the high performing districts, and that does impact us. First of all, it impacts us monetarily, but it also impacts us, you know, the morale, the way we feel about ourselves. I mean, I think we do an outstanding job, but it really does break our hearts that as soon as the identification system comes out, boom, Brentwood is going to certainly be on the bottom of the list. And you know, I would like them to consider factoring in our different populations when they're calculating whether a district is succeeding or not.
Yes. Along those lines, there is a group of districts on Long Island that the commissioner had given us the green light to look at alternatives as to how our districts are represented when you have the data in the, you know, coming out on school report cards. It doesn't show the successes that your teachers and your administrators are really experiencing based on the things that you need to do versus some other districts. And I'm not going to minimize the work in any district. I will tell you, though, that the monies, I'm probably the only one sitting in this room that has tax certiaries that we have to pay directly. And that's always another piece of the pie, and I think in Yonkers you're well aware. And so with a little bit of tax relief over the last 2 years, we've been able to bring back, and some advocating, I know you saw me in Albany, we've been able to bring back, some of the things. But there was a person at the central office that was doing personnel. I now do that for no additional cost. I do all the superintendent's hearings for no additional, pay. We have people in our district, and I will not minimize the work that the teachers are doing and the teacher assistants, that maybe 4 people were doing it 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 7 years ago. So I really commend the people that we work with, our colleagues, whatever their position is, they do more with less. And so we've been able to sustain that so that I can keep some of our classes, reasonable. And I'm not going to say by any chance, especially when surrounding me are districts that have a very different profile.
In regard to 2 things. One, most of our districts, almost all of them, don't have, the county takes the tax surcharge. It's only the cities, the Glen Cove and Long Beach. Nassau is really an anomaly about that. Secondly, in regard to the identification of schools, I know Mike has talked to me about that, the Pat Med before, and Brentwood. Some of the identification was done not the way the regents would have liked to see it.
Not the way we would have liked it.
And it was done with some malice aforethought on districts that opted out. That was not the intention. In fact, we were told as regents that it would not have consequences, but it does have consequences. And some of those are morale, some of those are reputational for people moving into the district and others. But one thing that really concerned me is that I've been to many districts that have these kids coming in at 16, 17 years old, and they're counted in the cohort for graduation when there's no way that these kids are going to graduate on time. And so that gets counted against them in the identification. There has to be some identification. That's someplace that I think we can make a difference. I'm not sure how much of this is federal government versus the regents, but we should be looking into that.
Yeah, thank you. Someone else.
So can I just, Seaford's a unique community in that it's average in everything and below average with regards to how we spend our funding. So we're about 2,300 students. We just did a demographic analysis last year. My swing in any given year is 26 kids. So I'm pretty solid with what my population is going to be. But when we take a look at how we've handled things, we were on austerity in 11-12, and programs were cut. So for years, we operated bare bones. I had no curriculum leaders in my district. I had assistant principals, and I had chair people that were .2 release, could not do any administrative duties. My teachers, when you take a look at the salaries, that's really where the bulk of our budget is, right, on salaries. So what we're not talking about in the room is the fact that districts that are like the middle class districts, sometimes the way we afford our budgets is our teachers are suffering because they're making less than teachers to the right and to the left of us. So just because you're a low wealth district doesn't mean you're not spending a lot on your teachers. So you take a look at the cost of really funding our most valuable resource, our teachers. A district like Seaford, up until this past year, we had a part-time athletic director. We don't have a director of guidance. We just restored some of our 7th grade programs from 11-12. So, and our administrators, our assistant principals, are coming in at like $124,000, which for Long Island is really low. So these are the ways that, and our teachers are lower. So we can't compete sometimes with these districts when we're looking for talent pool to bring the teachers in. So at some point we have to take a look at the scale by district as to what we're paying our teachers, and that's the bulk of our budget.
Yes, I think there's a number of conversations about this disparity within communities, like you're pointing out, and we're very mindful of in some of the legislation we did, as you know. We did these 2 big bills, both in your district, right? That, haven't gone to the governor yet, that our sense that the board was not doing well enough by the students. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yeah. What do you think, Ryan?
So, yeah, I understand your point. There's disparity with pay, there's disparity with benefits, and it doesn't always make sense from a rational point of view. Are there other issues in terms of thinking about, so you understand our challenge, which is we have a short-term challenge, which is to deal with whatever the governor's budget is and to begin to address and try to move towards greater equity while at the same time moving towards fully funding the formula. That's one set of issues. We also have a long-term challenge, which is to move the state towards a better way, a fairer way of ensuring every child gets the kind of quality education that we all want for all of our children. So we have a lot on our lap. I would say about our assembly colleagues are also informally having similar kinds of conversations with stakeholders throughout the state, and I expect that they will be partners in our effort as they have been with us in trying to move the needle in the right direction. Yes, you were going to say something.
Thank you. So, somebody said it earlier, at times it sounds like a tale of two cities. And you know, New York is this unbelievable state, but within it, we do have districts like my friends in Brentwood that have very high need. And Rich quoted a number, 1.3 billion if the foundation formula ran as it was written. I represent one of 276 districts in New York State that are on Save Harmless. If you took all the money from the Save Harmless districts that's over what the foundation aid ran, it would come out to about 315 million. So, you know, that would only begin to put a dent in Rich's situation. 80% of the districts are much like Sayville. Sayville is an average wealth district. We are smack on the top of the bell curve when it comes to wealth. We're 1.0 or something. We're not blind to the equity gap. We have partnered with neighboring districts. We do work with colleagues who are less fortunate than we are in terms of aiding and things like that. So, you know, we are open to sharing maybe non-monetarily. Times, somebody mentioned space, certainly knowledge. And those are things we've done through grants and are continuing to do. Just as a quick aside, Mr. Lochner and I were discussing, like, maybe, you know, in the context of this room, we could have he and I could have a mud fight to kind of duke it out over to see who gets the, you know, the share of state aid. But we're kind of glad it didn't come to that. Just you know, I feel that at the beginning I said sustainability and predictability were two very important things for us. So, you know, small scale, anything that can help us going forward in terms of knowing what to expect and being able to sustain our existing programs would be greatly appreciated. And then buying time for the long term to, you know, look at the major readjustments. Thank you.
Thank you for that, yes.
So, I mean, a couple of things that I think would be short-term fixes. One is looking at the median income versus the mean income, get rid of the outliers. In Fort Washington, that would bring our wealth per household from over $400,000 to around $125,000. That's how it's significant it is when you have a few Forbes 500 people who don't pay their fair share of real estate taxes based upon their income. The other thing is the regional costs. What's happened over the past 30 years is how people spend their money has changed significantly. It used to be your rent was 25% of your salary. Now it's about 40% of your salary. Services have become a much larger factor. So all of those things need to be looked at when you look at the regional cost adjustments, is how people are spending their money now versus how they were spending their money when the formula was done. It's not just as simple as just looking at salaries, because salaries, salaries are not necessarily a living wage, as you people are all well aware of. And the third thing is for students with a growing population, a growing student population, the tax cap puts that extra burden on us, and there needs to be something in there to adjust for that, because more students require more teachers, require more staff, sometimes require more buildings, and that the tax cap does not let us do anything toward that by keeping our increase basically just what our mandated costs are without that.
I would say that, and it wouldn't be fair to have the conversation, that foundation aid is not the only place where the state funds public education. It's a share of it. It's an important share that's supposed to address some of these equity issues. That's why we're focused on it. But clearly, we fight for education aid outside of the foundation aid formula, and we will continue to do that. We did last year, and I think, you know, in the years that I've been in the legislature, we have continued to try to increase state funding. If it's not always through foundation aid formula, we do the best we can. And we're going to continue. And this is very helpful in both helping us in a short term, hopefully, and in a longer term perspective of how to improve state funding for education. And really with the goal of equity and predictability, as you say. Predictability is very, very important for these districts. I know I funded an after-school program for 2 years in Yonkers. It was a fantastic program. I lost the funding in the assembly, and the program ended. And, you know, that's a bad way to run a program, in my opinion. So I know it firsthand. I don't have any more. If there's no more, any of my colleagues want to say anything in closing?
Just want to thank everybody for coming out. I think all of us at the end have the same interest to make sure every child in this state has an equal opportunity to a quality education. A lot of things have changed. There's a lot of work to be done, but I think discussions like this help. Throwing out ideas are helpful, and I appreciate very much everybody being here today.
I also would like to thank everybody, and thank you, Senator Mayor, for coming here, and Senator Brooks, thank you for showing us where you started. And all my colleagues, Senator Lou and the others who are no longer here this afternoon. I think we got a lot of solid information, and it will be extremely helpful, I believe, to me, and I think to all my colleagues. But as you know, we are just part of the process. We get a budget, and then our ability to deal with that budget is somewhat limited. Because we also work with our partners in the Assembly, but I think you will find that we in the Senate majority are going to do all we can to try to not only resolve the foundation aid problem, but also make sure particularly our Long Island schools get the funding that they need. And quite frankly, it was up to me. I would take funding out of other parts of the state budget to put it into public education. And maybe that's something we can get some momentum for. But there's a lot of work to do. But as Senator Kavinsky said, and I echo him, this is not going to be an easy budget. And we look forward to working with you to try to resolve all these issues. Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting me cross the border.
It's a tax match.
I figured it was going to be something. I do want to take a moment to thank my Long Island colleagues, whether it be down here or in Albany. The revered and feared Long Island Six are relentless in their advocacy for Long Island, making sure that people understand the needs that, somebody mentioned some of the perceptions that are out there, but they're always trying to make sure that they get their fair share, and then some, sometimes. So thank you very much, gentlemen. And
is it true there's going to be a wall and Queens is going to pay for the wall?
Some rumors like that, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to email additional comments, Georgia, come see Georgia. She's over here, my committee